My daughter, who got married just 3 months ago, suddenly appeared at my door in the middle of the night. What could have happened? When I saw her, her face was swollen and bruised. I was shocked by how much her appearance had changed. As she began to tell me her story, I shook with anger. This was unforgivable. Had his promise to make her happy been nothing but a lie? I vowed to get revenge on whoever had hurt my precious daughter. My name is Susanna, and I'm 50 years old. I divorced when my daughter, Layton, was still young, and I raised her while working full-time. Layton is shy but has a strong spirit and works hard. Thanks to her determination, she landed a job at her dream company. Layton has always been my motivation, helping me keep going through tough times. When she told me she had someone special she wanted me to meet, my heart was filled with joy. The person she introduced was a man named Carter, who worked at one of her company's clients. He was 7 years older than Layton and looked smart in his suit. Greeting me kindly, he seemed serious and sincere right away. "I've come to ask for your blessing for Layton and me to get married," he said. But I was surprised, as I thought I was just meeting her boyfriend. Layton was only 23, and they had only been dating for 6 months. "You're both still young," I gently said. "Don't you think it's a bit early to think about marriage?" I tried to discourage them politely, but Carter stood up straight and looked me in the eye. "I can't imagine being with anyone else but Layton," he said earnestly. "I believe I'll never meet another woman as amazing as her." His serious expression showed how much he cared for my daughter. "Mom, I feel the same way," Layton added. "Please give us your blessing for our marriage." Seeing their determination and hearing Layton's words, I agreed to support them. "Thank you so much. I promise I'll make Layton happy," Carter said. As I watched the two of them smile at each other, I couldn't help but smile too. But after Carter left, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease about their marriage. Something just didn't feel right. Is this really okay? Isn't it too soon? I thought. I've heard that all parents have mixed feelings when their children get married. To be honest, I had imagined my daughter would marry much later, so I wasn't really prepared for this. They looked so happy together. Surely, everything would be fine. After that, we met Carter's parents, and everything went smoothly as the wedding approached. Both Carter and Layton were only children, and Carter's parents seemed to really like her. "Mom, I'm thinking of living with Carter's parents after we get married," Layton said. While it was nice that they liked her, I felt uneasy about their suggestion to live together. "Are you sure about this? I don't have experience, but I've heard living with in-laws can be tough," I replied. "I get along well with his parents, and with Carter there, I'm not worried," Layton assured me. I figured that since she was sincere and loved by her elders, she would manage just fine. Plus, their home was only a 20-minute drive from mine, so I felt reassured that I could get there quickly if needed. After the wedding, my daughter started her new life with her in-laws. I thought she must be busy working hard. However, about a month later, I noticed changes. The daily messages from Layton stopped, and even when I messaged her, I rarely received a reply. Not wanting to intrude too much but feeling worried, I decided to call her. When I did, Carter answered. "Could I speak to Layton?" I asked. "She's in the bath right now. Don't worry, she's doing fine," he replied. His tone was soft but left no room for further discussion, so I ended the call without hearing my daughter's voice. After that, I still didn't get any messages or calls from Layton. I decided to visit her in person. Carter's mother had told me to come by any time, so I went to their home that weekend. When I arrived, Carter's mother answered the intercom curtly and told me Layton was out with Carter. "I'm sorry for coming by suddenly. Do you know when they'll be back?" I asked. All I got in return was a deep sigh. "You should call before coming. I don't know when they'll return." feeling that she had a point. I couldn't say anything more and had to leave Carter's house. I wondered if I was worrying too much, but it felt like Carter and his mother's attitudes had changed since the wedding, and I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. After thinking about it, I figured I'd feel better if I could just hear Layton's cheerful voice, so I called her workplace. To my shock, I was told she had already resigned. Moreover, they told me that they were in trouble because Layton had quit so suddenly. There's no way she would just leave her job like that. She was overjoyed when she got the offer from her dream company. We had celebrated together. Besides, Layton was excited about balancing work and home life, so it didn't make sense for her to resign out of nowhere. Something was definitely wrong, but I didn't know what to do. If I visited Carter's house again, I wasn't sure if they would even let me see her. I considered contacting the police, but then something unexpected happened. 2 days after I learned about her resignation, the doorbell rang in the middle of the night. Who could it be at 2 a.m.? I suspiciously looked at the intercom screen. It was dark, and I couldn't see clearly, but it looked like Layton. I rushed to the door and quickly opened it. What happened? I've been so worried because I couldn't contact you. Mom, I'm sorry. My happiness at seeing her quickly faded when I saw her face. Layton was unrecognizable, swollen and covered in bruises. What on earth happened to you? You look terrible. For a moment, my daughter trembled and cried, and I just rubbed her back, trying to calm her down. Layton spoke haltingly, her voice thick with emotion. As she shared her story, it became clear that Carter's attitude had completely changed right after their wedding. He told her, "Now that you're my wife, you should serve us," and treated her like a servant. The terrible condition she was in was caused by Carter and his parents. I had suspected something was wrong when Layton rushed to my house, but hearing the details filled me with rage. I didn't want to trouble you, but I'm sorry. Seeing my daughter in such pain made me feel a strong desire for revenge against them. I wanted them to suffer for what they had done. I vowed in my heart that I would never forgive Carter and his parents, who had promised to make her happy but had caused her so much pain. For now, I let Layton rest and decided to confront Carter's family when daylight broke. The next morning, we first went to the hospital to have her injuries treated. After that, I drove with my daughter to their house. As expected, they were in a panic, having noticed Layton was missing. "So, you took her after all?" Carter's father shouted angrily when he saw it was me on the intercom. "Can you explain why Layton is in this condition?" I asked sternly, unfazed by his response. Next to me stood my daughter, her cheeks still swollen and bandaged, looking pitiful. Seeing her like this seemed to make them aware of the neighbors watching, so they let us into the house. The three of them hesitated for a moment but quickly revealed their true colors. Carter's mother glared at Layton and sneered. "We were just disciplining her a bit because she wasn't working properly." "What are you saying?" I shot back. "Carter, didn't you promise to make my daughter happy?" "That was only if she fulfilled her duties as a wife properly," he replied. "But she was too focused on her job. That's why I submitted her resignation letter for her." Layton hadn't quit her job willingly. Carter had done it without her knowledge. Tearfully, she explained that by the time she realized it, it was too late. Carter didn't like that Layton was busy with work and was coming home later than he did. She was working hard because she was excited to be at her dream job. "That's not my concern," Carter said dismissively. "If she can't balance both, she has to quit." Carter continued. "It took her an hour just to make dinner. She can't do any household chores properly." Even Carter's father chimed in against her. My daughter's shoulders shook with fear. "Couldn't you have supported her?" "Carter's mother?" I asked. Carter's mother crossed her arms and replied, "When I came here as a bride, I had to do everything and learn through experience." "That's right. It's a generational thing," Carter's father added. acting as if they had done nothing wrong. They nodded at each other, showing that Carter's mother had forced all the housework onto Layton while doing whatever she wanted. Carter's father, who had retired and stayed home, constantly monitored Layton and interfered with everything she did. They had even taken away Layton's phone to stop her from contacting me. When I visited their house, they had restrained her to prevent her from going outside. Layton had hoped that Carter would change and help her despite the terrible treatment she received. But that hope was in vain. Their treatment of her only worsened. They made her eat leftovers, claiming it was a waste of gas to cook fresh meals, and barely let her use more than a trickle of water for showers. When Layton could no longer bear it and told them this wasn't right, she suffered terrible injuries. They called her insolent and slapped her hard on the cheek. They took turns beating her, saying they would re-educate her. Finally, after being released while covered in injuries, Layton felt her life was in danger. While all three were asleep, she fled from her in-law's house, walking for over an hour to escape before arriving at my home. Before the wedding, you treated Layton with care. Why did you change so much? I can't accept this. I confronted them firmly. The three of them exchanged glances and smirked. From the beginning, I just wanted a wife who would obey me. I thought Layton would make a good servant, Carter said nonchalantly. His mother sighed, saying Layton was really disappointing. Well, she must have learned her lesson from this incident. Why don't we give her another chance? Carter's father suggested, and they all burst into laughter. That's enough. I can't forgive this anymore, I said, anger rising within me. Layton stared at the three of them and exclaimed, "How dare you speak to us like that?" When Carter tried to grab my daughter in anger, I quickly restrained him, pinning him to the floor. He struggled, and his parents stood frozen in shock at my swift movement. I hadn't mentioned it before, but I had been on the verge of making it to the Olympics in wrestling when I had to give it up due to an injury. I increased the pressure on Carter, and tears filled his eyes as he flailed his arms and legs. When I finally loosened my grip, he slumped down weakly, looking pathetic. Now, who should I deal with next? I said, cracking my knuckles as I slowly approached his parents. Please stop, they begged, covering their heads and trembling violently. I had sent my daughter off wishing for her happiness, but I vowed never to forgive them for what they had done to her. The three of them shrank back at my fierce demeanor. Carter, please divorce me, Layton said, following my lead. She presented the divorce papers in front of him. What are you talking about? I absolutely won't divorce you, he yelled, his face turning red. This morning, I took my daughter to the hospital and got a medical certificate for her injuries. I've also filed a police report. We have done nothing wrong, so we will fight this to the end, I told them slowly, looking at each of them in turn. Now, sweat was pouring down their foreheads as they started panicking, crying out, "Please stop. What about our reputation?" I want a divorce as soon as possible, Layton said, looking at them with disgust. I look forward to seeing what happens to you. You'd better regret what you've done. We gathered Layton's belongings and headed for the entrance. Wait, we heard Carter's pitiful voice behind us, but Layton and I left their house without looking back. After that, the divorce was finalized successfully, and Layton received $20,000 in compensation from Carter. The police report was accepted, and the three of them were questioned by the police. Although they were released soon after, I heard that the police came to their house to inspect the scene, which sparked gossip in the neighborhood. They were now viewed with suspicion. When Layton told her former colleagues about the mistreatment she endured from Carter, the news spread to his company, their client, and he was removed from the fast track to promotion. Meanwhile, Layton slowly healed from her mental and physical wounds at our home and began looking for a new job. My life is far from over. In fact, I've started training again because I want to get involved with wrestling once more.
Iris drove her brand new car through the city centre, singing along to the radio. The singer crooned about love, fidelity and separation from her beloved. This theme always touched the deepest strings of Iris's kind soul, though fate had deprived her of true love and fidelity. But for now she was rushing to meet a potential client, so her mood was quite high. There was a traffic jam at the exit from the bridge to the wide avenue. 10 o'clock in the morning, 4-lane road, not rush hour, and how could there be a traffic jam? I don't want to be late, Iris said worriedly and got out of the car. Several cars ahead, a huge man with a bald head and bulldog face was arguing loudly with an elderly, frail man sitting behind the wheel of an old wrecking car. "You made a sharp left without signalling. How could I have anticipated such a manoeuvre? There's a sign here. Turning left is forbidden." The elderly man tried to justify himself. "Do you have a video recorder? So how do you prove it? Let's not call the police. Just pay for my repairs and go on your way. You don't have insurance. It could cost you a lot of money." The brazen man in the SUV started to threaten. "Oh, come on," Iris intervened in the dispute, looking very convincing. "Look, your SUV is facing left, blocking both lanes. Moreover, the turn was made against a forbidden sign and from the rightmost lane. Otherwise, how do you explain the car's position? The bumper's scratched right at the bend on the left. Do you think anyone would believe that an old Ford could turn a 2-ton SUV around with a light touch?" Iris suddenly took out several large bills from her purse and put them into the large hand of a bulb man with a bulldog-like face. "I hope this will be enough to fix the bumper. Please stop arguing. People are rushing, especially me. Otherwise, I'll call my lawyer, and we'll see who's right and who's wrong." The driver of the SUV wanted to object, but Iris's resolute speech and his own guilt in the accident stopped him from further proceedings and threats against the old taxi driver. He silently got into his huge car and drove away. "My darling, I'll give you everything," whispered the unhappy elderly man, almost in tears. He took Iris's hand in his heavy hands and even tried to kiss it, but she pulled her hand away. "Come on, I'm just very late and could lose much more because of this delay. Also, I'm all for justice. Be more careful in the future and get insurance, or you really will be left without pants," she said with a smile and got into her car. Driving a few hundred meters from the scene of the accident and reflecting on what had happened, she suddenly remembered the moment when the poor old man, out of gratitude, tried to kiss her hand. Iris had noticed the terrible scar on his hand even then, but hadn't paid much attention to it. Now it seemed to her that she had seen it somewhere before. His slightly creaky voice also seemed painfully familiar to her. She even pulled over to the side of the road to remember. God, it's been so many years. I don't even remember the license plate number now. What a fool I am. She turned back, but the scene of the accident was not visible behind the flow of cars, and it was unlikely that the elderly man was still standing there. "I'll find you, Peter, for sure. You're the kindest man in the world. It was you. There's no doubt about it." Thinking about this, Iris even wept, but then she pulled herself together, wiped the mascara under her eyes, and hurried to the meeting. She always recalled her childhood with a shudder. Her family lived in a small provincial town, with a city-forming enterprise, where her father worked, and one hotel where her mother worked. Their wages were often delayed and small. In addition, her father often drank and threw her and her mother out of the house. They lived in a small apartment that hadn't been renovated in decades. Old, faded wallpaper hung down in places, a reminder of floods and freezing temperatures. Her father, who was already frowning and drunk, began to raise his hand against his wife and daughter. Sometimes, Iris and her mother, Heather, spent the night at the home of a kind neighbour, Peter, who worked as a forester. Iris's father even tried to fight with him a few times, but Peter was much older and did not give in, even threatening to turn the troublemaker over to the police. When Iris was 11 years old, her father died of alcohol intoxication. Peter was a widower. His wife died right after his son Simon was born. They had not had children for a long time and had already resigned themselves to being childless. They often babysat the neighbourhood children. His wife Mandy worked as a seamstress, but she loved to read, and the neighbourhood children loved to come to their yard to listen to her tell fairy tales and stories she had read in her childhood and youth. By the age of 40, realising that they would not have their own children, Peter and Mandy were about to adopt a child from an orphanage. But suddenly, one day at work in the sewing shop, Mandy became ill. She felt nauseous and almost fainted. The heat and being behind the machine all day long, anyone can get unwell. Mandy complained about the poor labour conditions and lack of a good ventilation in the sewing shop. A week later, she was sitting in the doctor's office, feeling very uncomfortable. She was almost 40, her husband was older, and she was vomiting like a student with alcohol poisoning. "So, lady, are we going to have a baby? Or is it a little late for that?" "I wouldn't advise it. You have a weak heart. It's all written in your medical card about your heart. You've lived so many years without children, and what if something happens? The child will be left without a mother." "I'll give birth. If something bad happens, I have a good husband, and my parents are not yet old. They will be the people to raise the child," said Mandy firmly, and jumped out of the doctor's office. Peter was waiting for her in the clinic lobby. "Honey, we're going to have a baby! A baby!" shouted Mandy, almost running down the wide corridor of the old provincial hospital. Peter was crying, not even hiding his tears from the staff and patients around him. He picked up his wife in his arms and began to twirl her around. "Come on, stop, please. I'm already dizzy. Put me on the ground or I'll pass out. Actually, I want pickles, cherries, and lemon waffles," Mandy demanded, laughing and tenderly kissing her husband. March was warm and sunny that year. Peter often went to the forest to feed the deer that were starving after a long cold winter. He did not enjoy hunting, though he went with an old rifle for safety. A couple of years ago he met a bear that woke up early after hibernation. He had never gone into the woods without a gun since. In the forest lake on the border of the forestry department where Peter served, the ice was still firm, although the temperature had broken all records recently. At the height of the day, it reached +5 and even more. Weekend fishermen came to the lake like locusts to fish on the last ice. Sometimes they stayed overnight in the forest hut right at the edge of the forest. Peter didn't mind that the fishermen had almost taken up residence in his forest hut, and he didn't even lock the door. He only warned them not to overheat the stove, otherwise there would be trouble because the forest was close by. One sunny day, when the forester once again went to put fodder in the moose nursery, there was a smell of smoke from afar. Probably the fishermen are coming for their catch again, Peter thought, unwinding a bale of hay. Then he heard a crackling sound and saw a column of grey smoke in the distance. When the forester ran to the place where the smoke was coming from, the forest hut was already burning, and the forest was on fire with it. It was a long way to go for help, and there was no one around. Probably the fishermen saw what they had done and ran away. Peter realised it at once from the tracks. He started pelting the hut with snow, went down to the lake several times, and drew water from the holes left by the fishermen, scooping it up with a big mug and pouring it into a bucket he found near the hut. Luckily, the smoke was noticed by some tourists nearby. They called for help. However, Peter was injured. His jacket caught fire. He managed to throw it off, but his skin was burned a little. Arrived firemen extinguished the fire, and the heroic forester was taken to the local hospital with burns and other wounds. Mandy was 8 months pregnant, and some not intelligent neighbour called to her, "Oh, what a sorrow! Peter has burned down, he's dead!" The births began prematurely and spontaneously. Mandy barely had time to get to the hospital before she gave birth to a frail, premature baby boy, who didn't even cry right away. When they tried to move the boy away, Mandy passed away before she even realised she was already a mother. No matter how the resuscitator and obstetrician tried to start her heart, it remained silent, without making a single knock. So, together with the news of the birth of his son, the forester received his first powerful slap from fate. For some time, the baby was kept in the paediatric ward due to prematurity and low weight, and the father was treated for burns and emotional wounds. But finally, Peter and his newborn son were discharged on the same day. "We have such a hard fate, Simon, and we can't change anything, so we have to live somehow," the forester said to his son, resignedly, when the nurse handed the baby to him. "No one can replace your mum, and I won't find a wife like that again, nor will I. But I'll raise you myself, don't worry, we'll manage." And so they lived. The neighbours helped the new father and raised Simon together. The boy grew up handsome like his mother, with cornflower-coloured eyes and hair curling around his forehead and temples. He was smart, went to school early, and spoke ahead of his peers. Peter was very fond of him. He reminded him so much of his wife. 2.5 years later, in an apartment on the first floor of the apartment building, Iris was born, and baby's clothes, blankets and bonnets from the forester's apartment on the 3rd floor moved to the apartment on the 1st floor. Times were hard. Iris's mother accepted any help from the kind-hearted neighbour upstairs. Iris grew up a healthy and strong girl, despite the difficult times, the eternal drunken scandals of her father. When Iris was 10 years old, her father died of drunkenness. The family's scandals stopped, but their finances collapsed. Sometimes they had nothing to eat for dinner, and Peter would bring a can of stew, a packet of pasta and vegetables. "Make some soup for your little one. It's bad without hot food. I'll get my paycheck tomorrow and we'll go to the store together. Don't refuse. Simon needs to buy sandals and I don't know anything about it. Mandy's mother used to help me choose, heaven rest her soul. But now, all hope is in you, Heather." Peter was lying, of course. Simon was 13 and could have chosen his own clothes and shoes. But the forester knew that Iris's last shoes had long ago torn, and her toes were sticking out through the holes. So they would go to the store and buy shoes and clothes for both children. Then they would go to a cafe, eat ice cream and drink sweet sodas. They'd walk around the park, ride the merry-go-round, and in the evening they'd come home so happy, as if there was no chaos in the country and everyone had enough money for life and entertainment. Peter was old enough to be Iris's grandfather and treated her with fatherly tenderness and reverence, feeling very sorry for them both, knowing that there was no one to help Heather, the orphan. The forestry job had a good salary, and it was paid on time, so Heather, Iris's mother, often asked Peter for a loan when her husband drank most of his earnings. "I will grow up and be rich," little Iris often said. "I'll take care of you and Mum when you're old. I'll feed you like in a restaurant, and then we'll go to the sea for a vacation." "Peter, have you ever been to the sea? My Mum and I haven't, and by the way, Simon will be my husband, and he won't be able to call me a baby any more." Iris dreamed, sitting on a bench near Peter, while her mother was on night duty at the local hotel. "And what if Simon doesn't want to marry you? You've got freckles all over your nose, and you fight with him all the time," laughed the neighbour. "Who's going to ask him? I'll tell him to get married, and he will. And if he doesn't, he'll get a punch in the nose," answered the perky Iris, even clenching her little hands into fists. Peter laughed heartily and stroked the girl's silky hair, which was tied in 2 thick and long braids. Time passed, and soon Heather was offered a good job in another district town. She was a laboratory technician by education, and there was no such job in her town, so she worked in a hotel and sometimes worked part-time in a nearby cafe as a dishwasher at night. "What about Peter and Simon? How will we live without them?" Iris asked while her mother packed things into boxes. "We will visit them. I was offered an office apartment there, and we'll sell this apartment to pay off our debts. We owe 3 banks, not to mention Peter's debts. We can't live off other people's money anymore. It's not right," Mum said with grit and determination. When Iris and her mother drove away, Peter shed a stingy, manly tear. and Simon ran after the car, which took away a part of his life in the person of Iris and her mother. Iris and her mother moved to a developing city of chemists. Heather got a job as a laboratory technician at a company that produced detergents. She liked the work, and the staff immediately accepted the young and pretty woman. They helped her as much as they could, knowing that Heather was alone and raising her child by herself. The company had a multi-block house with small apartments that were rented to workers for a reasonable fee. Heather got a cosy, bright room overlooking the square. The school where Iris was enrolled was only a couple of blocks away. It seemed like they could live happily, but the girl missed Peter and Simon very much. "Mum, I'm bored here. I miss Peter and Simon so much. How are they without us? Who will bake them apple cinnamon pie and blueberry cheesecakes? They probably eat only fried potatoes and pasta with stew. Mum, let's go to them on vacation," added Iris one day, when a tired Heather put her to bed. "Baby, I will not take a vacation in the nearest time, and I won't let you go to another city alone. It's a long way with no direct routes. You'll have to go through the regional centre with connections, and we can't invite them here. There's only one room and nowhere to sleep. Let's wait until summer. I'll get a vacation, and you'll be on break. We'll buy you all sorts of goodies and go for a whole week," promised Heather as she covered Iris with a blanket. The school year flew by quickly. Iris tried very hard and finished it without a single B to please her mother, who, as a reward, promised to go on vacation to visit Peter and Simon. But one tragedy changed everything for that little family. There was an accident at the plant, releasing poisonous chlorine gas. Several people were taken to the hospital with severe poisoning, including Heather. Peter arrived late in the evening. He was so disturbed by what had happened that the small vein on his temple kept throbbing, and it even seemed like it might tear through his thin, tanned skin. "My little girl, come on, don't cry. Your mum's going to be fine. You know what good doctors we have here. They'll cure her quickly." The former neighbour tried to calm Iris down. "Now, we'll pack your backpack, and you will come to us. You know how happy Simon will be. You can stay with us all summer. We'll go fishing and pick strawberries. We'll make jam and bring it to your mum. She'll get better right away, you'll see." Peter's kind and calm voice soothed the girl a little. She hugged him around the neck and, through her tears, said, "You are the best of all. And why aren't you my daddy?" The forester was so moved by these words that he turned away and wiped a tear from his rough, slightly unshaven cheek. "I'm too old to be your daddy, but grandfather is easy," Peter answered cheerfully. Taking the girl's hand, he hurried to the door. "Come on, let's run or we'll miss the bus." "My Simon is probably hungry. He never eats without me. He's grown a lot this year, taller than me, and wears size 43 shoes. He's into sports. He does the most pull-ups in class and runs faster than his peers. And he misses you and your mum very much. You are dear to us no matter what." Heather's recovery was slow. She spent the first week in intensive care under oxygen. Iris asked her father Peter to call the hospital regularly, but the answer was always the same. "Heather can't talk. She is in the intensive care unit." Simon and Peter did their best to comfort the girl, but by the end of the second week, Iris was completely disheartened. She cried all the time and couldn't sleep at night. "What if Mummy doesn't get better? Promise me you won't put me in an orphanage. Mum often talked about her childhood in the orphanage, and her eyes were so sad." Then the girl would start crying, and Peter and Simon couldn't calm her down. One day at the end of June, the phone rang in their apartment. Iris and Simon had gone to the river for a swim, and only Peter was in the apartment. "Hello, yes, I'm Heather's friend. Did something happen? Well, thank God. When can I talk to her? Her daughter is distressed. No, we're out of town and can't get there until tomorrow. What's the emergency? Yes, I understand. Can you tell me which clinic in the capital is the best place to take her? Yes, I realize it's a matter of finances. We'll do everything possible to make Heather well." After this difficult conversation, Peter rushed out of the apartment. The forestry chief listened attentively, scratched his almost bald neck and said, I can't give the whole sum, but my wife and I have been saving for a cruise, and for the sake of a worker like you, we can rest in the village at my mother-in-law's house. Don't worry, we'll make it. By the way, since you're going to sell your summer house, our accountant wanted to buy one. Heather had a huge lung damage, and without modern medical equipment, expensive drugs and proper care, she was at best threatened with disability. The clinic in the capital promised to put her back on her feet, but it cost a huge amount of money. The chemical company where the accident occurred also allocated money for the treatment and rehabilitation of its injured employees, but it was only enough for treatment in local hospitals. Iris spent the whole summer at Peter's house while her mother was being treated in the capital and then in the local hospital. Peter sold his summer house and his car to pay for the treatment. Nothing, Simon, money is junk, but helping a good person is worth a lot. Look how happy Iris is. She's waiting for her mum. She will be discharged in a couple of days. And you and I will be alone again, sighed Peter, and went to the kitchen to bake pancakes. Heather arrived only a week later, and Iris's happiness was unbelievable. Although her mother still looked very weak and sickly, Iris did not leave her side. "Mum, let's live here. I don't want to go back to that town," begged the girl. "Heather, you could stay here. Simon and I will live in the same room, and I'd give you a bigger room. We don't need much. I'm in the forest all day long, and you'll find some work here too. You can't go to that factory with your lungs. There's only chemistry there, and you need clean air and nutrition. After all, my summer house—" Peter hesitated at the last words. He sold the cottage to have extra money for treatment. "No, Peter," Heather answered. "I can't do that. I'll be transferred to another workshop. They pay a little less there, but there's no contact with chemicals. I'll be responsible for the factory territory from now on. I'll plant flowers and trim trees and shrubs, and it certainly won't affect my health. We have a tiny flat in the dormitory, and by the end of next year, a new house will be built for all those who suffered from the accident. We have to make our own way in life. I know you sold everything to get me into a good clinic in the capital. Peter, I can't make up for the sacrifices yet, but with time—" "Don't even think about it or I'll be offended. I didn't have an opportunity to take care of this summer house, so to prevent it from getting shabby, I sold it. And the car? To hell with it. I'm not much of a driver. I walk through the woods. As for Simon, he will grow up and he can buy himself a car and a summer house. He doesn't much like it either. He's all focused on training. Maybe he'll become a famous athlete or coach. So stop speaking about it. I wouldn't be afraid to give my life for you. I know what it's like for a child without a mother. There's my Simon, fed and clothed, but he misses his mother. You see how he is drawn to you and Iris, as if she were his sister." At the end of August, Heather began to head home. Iris kept urging her mother to stay here for good, but when the cab came to take them to the station, she said loudly and confidently, "When I grow up, I will definitely be rich and take Peter to live with me. I will treat him in the best hospitals so he will never die, just like my mum." Later, Peter often remembered her words. He thought of them when he fell into the wolf pit and broke 4 ribs, and when he and his son were evicted from their apartment to build a shopping centre. Peter had a pre-infarction then. For a man who had lived all his life in one place, it was too much before retirement to go to the outskirts of the city in a concrete box, where there was no park or garden, but only an expressway and a railroad junction. Meanwhile, the years have flown by, and Iris graduated from school. No matter how hard the doctors in the capital tried, they couldn't fully cure Heather, and every day she was accompanied by constant shortness of breath and eternal fatigue. "Mummy, I'm going to learn further and be successful and rich. We'll often go to the sea. They say the sea cures many diseases, especially lung diseases. Be patient a little longer," Iris used to reassure her mother. She passed her final exams brilliantly and graduated with honours. The girl was going to enroll in the Faculty of Economics. No one doubted that Iris would definitely get in. Her class teacher predicted a great future for her if she didn't get lazy, and the girl had no intention of being lazy. She spent all her vacation reading books, studying with tutors, and attending various preparatory courses. For the past 5 or 6 years, she and her mother Heather no longer spent vacations in their hometown with her Peter and Simon. At first, they rarely called each other, and one day, when they dialed the number, a strange voice informed them that they had dialed the wrong number. Heather thought Peter didn't want to communicate anymore. On graduation day, Heather began to iron the folds of Iris's ball dress, though she found it difficult to do so because of her illness. "Mum, stop fiddling with this dress. It's perfect already. Please, put some hairspray on my hair. My nails aren't dry yet and I can't myself." "Mum? What's wrong with you?" "Oh my God. It's my fault. You're not supposed to breathe hairspray. And the nail polish smell. Where's your inhaler?" The ambulance took a long time. Mum was gasping for air with her mouth open and rolling her eyes fearfully. Neither the open window nor the inhaler helped. Heather was suffocating. Her lips turned blue, and she began to wheeze and convulse. The ambulance paramedic tried for a long time to resuscitate the woman who had stopped breathing, but all attempts were in vain. Heather died without ever seeing her daughter, rich and successful. Iris's class teacher was struggling to find the words that could bring back to life his favourite student. "You just don't give up, you hear? You can't give up. In a couple of weeks you'll be 18, and you'll be an adult. Being an adult means being strong and taking responsibility for your actions and life in general. What would your mum say if she knew she was the cause of your unfulfilled hopes? In her memory, you just have to go and pass your university exams. Not sit there silently staring at one point and crying for days and nights on end. Iris, prove that you are a worthy daughter of your mother. Don't betray her memory." The 2 weeks that had passed since her mother's death, Iris did not remember at all. She had hardly eaten or slept, and reacted neither to people nor to events, nor to the change of day and night. And then one day, she woke up from a short and vivid dream. Her mummy was stroking her long, thick hair, asking if she was ready to study at the university. Was she sure of herself? She had promised to bake her favourite blueberry pie if Iris passed the competition. After that dream, Iris promised herself that she would definitely enroll. And she did. "It was too easy. I was expecting something more complicated," Iris said dryly to her class teacher. "So, that's just great. But don't lose yourself. Read, prepare for your studies, repeat what you've learned. Studying will be much harder. University teachers won't chew every word like school teachers. You'll have to figure out many things on your own. Remember, you can always count on my help and support. I'm an old man, and most likely your graduation was the last of my teaching career. What's an old man to do when he retires? Right, communicate with their beloved students. So don't be shy, call me any time. I'm in touch." Then he shook Iris's hand and with a clumsy, old man's gait went away. Now Iris was a student at a prestigious university. The girl moved to the regional city and stayed in a student dormitory. The scholarship was only enough for travel to the university, and the pension, appointed after her mother's death, covered only 1 week of living expenses, eating just bread and milk. So Iris firmly decided to work part-time in the evenings. Then a convenient opportunity arose. Walking once from the library to the dormitory, Iris saw an ad on a lamppost. "Need an au pair for an elderly sick person." The girl immediately called it. On the other end of the line, a young and very pleasant baritone answered, "Yes, this is my ad. I'm looking for an assistant for my grandfather. I lived with him, but now I have frequent long business trips, and my grandfather is disabled and needs help. You don't need to sit with him. Just go to the store a couple of times a week. cook meals and clean the apartment. I will pay well. Grandpa is an old-school man that can be a bit difficult to deal with, so patience and the ability not to give in to his provocations will be required. If you agree, you can come today to meet your ward. I am leaving on a business trip in a couple of days." Iris agreed without hesitation. Such luck! Employment only a couple of times a week and good money. But she had no idea what was ahead of her. Arriving at the place, Iris did not immediately orient herself. The houses on the street were arranged in a chaotic order, as if someone was deliberately trying to confuse people looking for a certain address. Right after the 6th house was the 11th, and the 8th, which Iris was looking for, seemed to have disappeared. "Could you tell me where the house number 8 is? I'm completely confused," Iris asked an elderly woman of a very strange appearance. Over a bright red cloak with a huge scarf of fine patterned knitting with tassels at the edges. On her head, she wore a grey hat with tucked edges and a brooch on the brim. The woman was wearing half boots with numerous buttons along an oblique line, fashionable at the beginning of the last century. "The 8th house is on the other side of the street, next to the former laundry. Oh, what am I explaining to you? The laundry was closed in 76. You weren't even born yet. Come on, I'll walk you out. Who lives in this house?" "I know all the old tenants. My mother was a concierge until 81. Yes, she lived until she was 96 years old and had good memory and judgment because she socialized only with intelligent people. And then all sorts of trash started coming to the house. Disposable singers, doctors of science who brought their titles for money, and artists who created some kind of ointment. Of the old ones, only Mrs. Benneth, the newspaper correspondent, and Miss Collins, a ballerina from the local theatre, remained there. She still teaches ballet, even though she is over 80. Oh yes, and that nasty old man from the 2nd floor, Mr. Brightmeyer, a military doctor with the rank of colonel, by the way. He wasn't always so harmful, but when his wife left our world he shut himself off and only occasionally mumbled hello, as if he was doing us a favour with his greeting. But he hasn't been out for 5 years. At first his daughter looked after him, a nice woman. They say she remarried and went abroad. Now his grandson looks after him. He's hired nurses, but just imagine, not a single one stayed more than a week. That's why his grandson isn't married. He's always away at his grandfather's or on business trips. He's an important engineer for modern equipment, something to do with weather, satellites. Anyway, he's intelligent. Well, here we are. Aren't you hired to look after this grandfather?" the elderly lady asked sceptically. "Yes, that's precisely what it is. I need the money badly. I don't have any relatives and I'm studying, and here I can earn something. It's better than being a waitress or a cleaner. I also have to go to lectures and study. A free schedule is just what I need." "Then good luck," the elderly woman said incredulously and pointed to the house. The girl went up to the 2nd floor, fixed her hair, and hesitantly pressed the bell button. The door was opened by a man in his 30s, but with bald spots and a small dark beard. If it weren't for his thick-rimmed glasses, he could be called handsome. "Hello? Are you from the ad? Come in. I'll introduce you to my grandfather. But don't say no right away. He's nice. He's just very lonely." "Grandpa, I found you a good assistant. She's a student and a very nice girl. Don't make such a gloomy face. You know very well that I will not leave you completely unattended. And a nice girl is better than some tedious old lady nurse, or always in a hurry social worker. You know how to cook soup and make porridge, don't you?" addressed the man to Iris. "I'm a great cook. My mother was ill for a long time and I learned to do everything myself," answered the girl, and even blushed, ashamed of her own praise. "My God, I didn't even introduce myself. My name is Clyde. And how do I call you?" "Iris? Great. It's a pleasure. This is my grandfather, Mr. Brightmeyer, a military doctor, colonel, and an excellent man, though at first glance very strict. I think you'll find a common language. I would like that very much. I'm leaving the day after tomorrow, and if you hadn't responded to my announcement, another person would have flown on a business trip. And this is my development, and I wouldn't want it to be supervised by someone that is not particularly interested in my brainchild. Iris, I need your help for 2 weeks. Well, 3 at the most. My gratitude will know no bounds. That's an advance and money for food. The fridge is full. Grandpa doesn't eat much, but he likes good hot food. He can heat it up, but he can't cook it. Here are the second keys and a list of medicines to buy. He knows when to take his medication and takes it regularly. After all, he's a doctor. Well, I got to pick up my tickets at the office and pack my stuff. I live 2 blocks away, so I'll see you again if you stay until tonight. With these words, Clyde kissed his grandfather on the forehead and jumped out the door. Tell me, my dear, why do you need a stupid old man? Clyde has no choice. My apartment is in the centre, and it's a prestigious neighbourhood. Academics and professionals used to live here. A well-known pianist was my neighbour. Good memory to him. How much money did my grandson promise you? Don't be afraid, I'm strict, but I notice good people right away. There was a madam before you, a bore and a fool. I can't stand fools, but you're a smart lady, since you're studying. That's commendable. Well, at least go cook me dinner. Clyde bought a chicken. I like legs and wings in sour cream with potatoes. I'm tired. I'm going to take a nap. When you leave, don't slam the door too hard. The new neighbours have a 1-year-old baby. Cranky as hell. With these words, Mr. Brightmeyer went to his room, leaving Iris in a kind of prostration. Both the grandson and the lady from the neighbourhood described the old doctor as a man rude and resentful of people, but he turned out to be quite a nice old man. Having prepared dinner, Iris was about to leave, but noticed that the dust on the furniture had not been wiped for several days, and the floor in the hallway was trampled, as if a platoon of soldiers had come in dirty shoes. Having put the apartment in elementary order, the girl didn't notice how dark it got, and a fine drizzling rain began to fall. At about 7 in the evening, Mr. Brightmeyer came out of his room. My goodness, are you still here? Do you live far away? Wait, soon Clyde will come. He'll drive you home. I bought him a new car last year. Let him work it off. You're so fast. Dinner is ready and the apartment is shining. No one's ever helped me like that. They come for an hour, cook some edible, dust the corners with a brush, and then they're gone. You know what? Stay for dinner. Clyde promised to buy me some cognac on his departure. The key rattled in the keyhole. Iris, are you still here? And how it smells delicious. I'm so hungry. Let's have dinner together and I'll take you where you need to go, cheerfully ordered Clyde as he took out a bottle of American cognac from his briefcase. Well, what did I say? Although he is a slob, he fulfills my requests faithfully, said the grandfather with a smile and went to the room for shot glasses. And you, Iris, are a great person. That's what I sincerely appreciate in my grandfather. He recognizes people at once. He's the god of eloquence tonight. His attitude towards his other assistants ended with a rude greeting and a similar farewell. Did he tell you that I only care about him because of the apartment? That's what he tells everyone. I just love him. He's a bore, but he's a kind man at heart and he knows how to be grateful. You come on Saturday now. Nothing will happen to him in 3 days, and I won't leave until Friday. An hour later, Iris sat next to Clyde in the passenger seat of the car and listened to his quiet and pleasant baritone. She never paid much attention to men, especially much older than herself, but this time she caught herself thinking that she really liked sitting next to the man and listening to his cheerful chatter. Clyde was gone for more than a month and a half. He called often and apologized for being late. He always found time to thank Iris and ask his grandfather about his health. Clyde has forgotten about a normal life with his work, complained his grandfather. No wife, no fiancé, no free time. At his age, I already had a daughter of 10 and a son. Clyde's father, 7. He and his wife died in the mountains. They were vacationing there, skiing. An avalanche be damned. 18 years already. Clyde was only 13 at the time. After they died, he withdrew into himself. I was afraid that the boy would die from depression. And then he joined some club at school and started to make robots. And he liked it so much that after school he went to university and started doing the same thing. And he was so fascinated by it that he spent his days and nights in his technical laboratory. No, he had girls at first, but now, I don't know. He came here once with Holly, their employee. She was nice, but she was skinny and didn't talk much. I don't know what they have now, but he doesn't come with her anymore. One day, while talking like this, Mr. Brightmeyer fell asleep in his chair. Iris washed the dishes and was about to leave when the door opened quietly and Clyde entered. He looked thin and exhausted. "Hi, I just got off the plane. How's Grandpa? He fell asleep in his chair again, didn't he? Well, let him sleep. You can get to your dorm on your own, or if you like, you can stay here. There are 4 rooms," Clyde offered while unpacking his suitcase. "No, not at all. I have a seminar tomorrow and I still need time to prepare. I'll be here by the weekend," Iris said as she left her ward's apartment. Seeing Clyde, she really wanted to stay, to listen to his pleasant voice all evening, to look into his eyes through the lenses of his bulky glasses and just enjoy his presence. It's a kind of insanity. I thought about him the whole time he was gone. Maybe this is the love that everyone talks about and writes about in books, thought Iris, while riding the tram to her dormitory. Mr. Brightmeyer died on the eve of another year since the death of Clyde's parents. That day the grandson took his grandfather to the cemetery, and then they memorialized them at home in a small circle. Mr. Brightmeyer, Clyde, Iris, and Clyde's aunt Megan, who flew in from abroad every year on the anniversary of the death of her brother and his wife. "Look at this girl. She's smart, beautiful, and an excellent hostess. And I think she's in love with you," Megan advised her nephew when they were alone after seeing Iris off and putting grandfather to bed. "Is she in love with me? What makes you think that?" "I didn't see a single hint of it. Yes, she's kind, efficient, and grateful, but nothing more. And to be honest, I've been interested in her as a woman for a long time, but the age difference doesn't allow me to even hint at it. She's 19. I'm 32. She must have a boyfriend. Or, what do you call it now? Boyfriend, lover. I wouldn't mind having such a young and kind wife. But how do I know she will reciprocate my feelings? I would really hate to be rejected." Megan and her nephew chatted until almost midnight. At the first hour, Clyde decided to check on his grandfather before heading home for the night. Mr. Brightmeyer was cold, meaning he passed away right after the memorial dinner. He was buried next to his son and daughter-in-law with all honours. Iris wept to her heart's content. During these few months, she had become so attached to the old man that she also began to call him grandfather. Not many people came to the memorial meal for the old colonel of the medical service. Many of his friends and colleagues were no longer alive, and not many of his students remained in the city, mostly those who preferred military medicine to commercial medicine, and the old man could not stand such people, and they knew it. But the old doctor was more or less tolerant of one of his favourite pupils, who had great hopes but still preferred a more contented life. His name was Justin Graham, and he created his clinic from scratch, being still quite a young general practitioner, and in a couple of years raised it to such a level that he invited prominent doctors from the capital to perform complex operations and train the staff to work on new modern equipment. In its time, the working capacity and determination of the young doctor amazed even Mr. Brightmeyer. He prophesied a great future for him in military medicine, but Justin Graham had offended him greatly by choosing his own path after his internship. "And who is this young lady?" Justin asked Megan right after the wake. "Don't even think about getting her into bed with you, you old lecher," replied Mr. Brightmeyer's daughter ironically. "She is Daddy's nurse and au pair. She studies economics at the university. By the way, she's very clever and decent too. I'd like her to marry Clyde. Otherwise, he'll remain a bum with his science." Come on, I'm not old at all. Clyde and I are the same age, and I'm only a year older than him. And about the lecture, that's also very exaggerated. My wife left me when I was making a career, building a clinic, and was at work for weeks on end. Now, she kicks herself for that. She didn't believe in me, or in herself back then. But now she is married to the sales manager, and I have my own clinic, said Justin with a chuckle. Can you not laugh? We buried a respectful and decent man today, Iris said sternly, as she cleared the dishes from the table. I'm sorry, it won't happen again, Justin replied ingratiatingly and affectionately. She has a temper, he added quietly to himself, and in his beautiful brown eyes the lights of a hunter flashed. When almost everyone had left the houses, Iris got ready and Clyde, coming up to her, apologized for not being able to give her a ride. I'm sorry, I've had a few drinks. You know, my grandfather's death knocked me out. Let me call you a cab. Oh, no. I wouldn't trust such an attractive young lady to a strange cab driver. Iris, do you mind if I'm your personal driver for the day? Justin offered his services. It's probably not tactful to use you, but I'm so tired, and the day was so long and hard, that I can't refuse your offer, the girl answered politely. Iris, don't fall for the tricks of this ladies' man, Clyde warned, a little irritated, but with a slight smile, closing the door behind them. Justin Graham always got what he wanted. He was married to the daughter of an official from the Ministry of Health, and with his help he managed to get his own clinic. If his daughter had been far-sighted and not had an affair while her husband worked hard, she would now be swimming in luxury. But then suddenly her father was then kicked out of the ministry for abuse of position, and Justin quickly and painlessly formalized the divorce. Meanwhile, the clinic flourished. His mansion, in the most prestigious area of the city, was one of the most expensive and beautiful. He was loved by women for his cheerful, free-spirited disposition and attractive appearance. He never lied, not to friends, not to colleagues, not to women. This quality of his was also attractive. That's why, in the car, he proposed to Iris to meet, but without commitment. I'm a serious girl and I don't recognize free relationships. I will date only a man whom I will marry later, she answered decisively and got out of the car. And that was a challenge. Yes, Justin did not like to lose and treated the situation as a game, but seriously enough. After a month of courtship, flowers, expensive gifts and walks, Iris gave up. She completely lost her head, forgetting that she once liked Clyde. She even moved from A's to B's in some subjects, but she passed her first exams perfectly. Her only condition was that their wedding would take place only after graduation, and Justin agreed, for he himself had lost his head from love. As strange as it may seem, the wedding was modest. Iris insisted on it, and Justin, who didn't like to flaunt his wealth and was practical, immediately agreed to all her conditions. They lived well, and everyone thought, here is a good family, together in both sorrow and joy. But soon Iris began to build a career as an economist. As a result, Justin could hardly catch his wife at home because she was always at work. He offered her financial help, but she refused, saying a career built on someone else's money wouldn't bring satisfaction. A couple of years later, they started thinking about children. Iris, have you played with your career enough? Let's have another Iris, as smart and stubborn as you. Justin laughed and sarcastically suggested once. Why, let's do it. I have my own, albeit still small, consulting company that brings a stable income. And our children will be smart and beautiful as we are. Iris humorously replied, pouring her husband coffee. So today we come home early from work and work hard on this issue, Justin cheerfully suggested, finished his coffee, jumped into his car, and left for his clinic. After he left, Iris felt uneasy. She had been unprotected for many months, and the pregnancy wasn't happening. She even went to a doctor, but she didn't find any pathology and advised her to ask her husband to get checked. No, Iris did not despair. She calculated cycles, identified favourable days for conception, took vitamins, ate right, and even did yoga, but all her efforts were in vain. She even remembered a relative on her father's side who was childless and thought it might be hereditary. Overall, her soul was in chaos, something she couldn't solve without her husband's help. "Iris, I'm home and burning with desire," Justin said cheerfully, taking off his shoes and jacket on the run. Iris was just warming up dinner. "We need to talk," she said dryly, and turning sharply, almost dropped the dish with warmed dinner on the floor. "You have no face on you. Is something wrong? Are you sick?" Justin tried to find out the reason for his wife's bad mood. "No, I'm not sick. I'm fine. I just want to find out if everything is all right with your health. I've been unprotected for months, and there's been no result. I had a checkup, and here's the doctor's report." Iris carelessly threw a file with medical documents and examination results on the kitchen table. "I don't understand. You went to the local clinic, where the doctors are unskilled, having a husband who owns the best private clinic in the city? Are you out of your mind? And now you're suggesting I go to that godforsaken place for a checkup? Or will you let me use professional services? I'm not going for a checkup, I'm fine. I take care of my health and get checked every 6 months. You're crazy. You've ruined my whole day." Iris had never seen her husband in such a state and almost cried at his words. It was their first serious quarrel in 5 years of living together. "Iris, do you know that I'm always honest with everyone?" he said tiredly. "Yes, I do. It's the quality that played a key role in our relationship. What's your point now?" Iris asked and became wary. "I have another woman, and she is expecting a child from me. I couldn't wait any longer. Almost 2 years of unsuccessful attempts. I suggested IVF, surrogacy, but you didn't see it that way. Your unsuccessful attempts to get pregnant and have a baby on your own are nothing short of arrogant. I'm sorry, but I've decided. Don't take it as a betrayal. I don't love that woman, but I've wanted children for a long time, and I'll have them at any cost." "And you're sure he's yours? I wouldn't jump to conclusions. A perfectly healthy and examined wife, whom you supposedly love, can't get pregnant by a husband who hasn't been examined. But the first woman you meet immediately got pregnant, and you didn't have a shadow of a doubt?" "I don't recognize you, Justin." Iris went into the other room and cried. Then she quietly packed her things and left her husband the same evening. For several months, Iris lived in a rented apartment a couple of blocks from work. The problems heaped on her made her head spin, but strangely enough, the business flourished. She was the first to file for divorce, although her husband begged her to reconsider her decision for a long time. He discovered, after the birth of the child, that he had nothing to do with it. A DNA test simply and briefly announced to the young father that his share of paternity was 0. After the test, Justin underwent an examination, and it turned out that he was the cause of their conception troubles. But it was treatable. However, it was impossible to rewind time and beg for Iris's forgiveness. As a man of integrity, he gave her a good cut, and Iris opened a branch of her firm in another city and went headlong into work. "Ben, urgently to my office," Iris called to her best business assistant and simply the smartest employee. "I need to find someone urgently. His name is Peter. Jesus, what's his full name? Oh, yes, Peter Tull. I will write you the address where my mum and I used to live. Maybe they moved or changed their phone number. Also, he had a son named Simon, and he worked as a forester and was always on the honour board. He had a scar on his arm from a burn, and in general, there must have been many burns, I just don't remember where. He's over 70 now, or rather 75. That's all I know. Find them. Don't be shy with the money," Iris almost shouted, addressing the man who was writing down all the information on Peter on a tablet. Days passed, and the private detective, who was charged with the search, had not yet found either the old forester or his son. The apartment building was demolished for dilapidation, and the residents were dispersed to different parts of the town. The forestry really remembered their heroic employee and even pointed to his new address, but he wasn't found there either. The apartment was sold, and where the former tenants had moved to, neither the new occupants nor the neighbours knew. The former head of the forestry, an old but still reasonable man, remembered that there was some tragedy with the forester's son, and they had gone to the region for treatment. After that, their trail was lost. Iris hadn't found peace for more than a week. She wanted to find the man to whom she owed a lot. Was he poor and in need of help, or was he in danger, and he and Simon were in a difficult situation? "Mummy, sweetheart, help me. Our Peter and Simon are in trouble." Iris always sought her mother's help and memory when it was extremely difficult for her. No matter how mystical it sounded, almost always the only clever solution that solved all problems immediately came to her. Suddenly the phone rang. Iris grabbed the receiver as if it were a hot frying pan with a burning pancake. "Yes, I'm listening. Have you found him?" "My God, this isn't a neighbourhood, it's a slum. How did they get there?" "I'm on my way. Don't tell them anything. Just let them stay where they are." The sight in front of her was terrible. Peter's dwelling was a one-story barrack with crumbling plaster, resembling the skeleton of a huge rotting animal with bare ribs picked clean by scavengers. The detective met Iris at the porch, although it was hardly a porch, just a metal frame and fallen steps. The detective gave Iris a hand to help her avoid twisting her ankle on the threshold, and let her go forward with the words, "First floor, door on the left," before following her inside. The front door was a shriveled, shabby mess with sodden panelling, looking more like chaotic art than an entrance to a home. There was no apartment number or bell. Iris knocked cautiously and touched the doorknob. The door opened with an awful creaking sound. The room was clean, but so squalid it made Iris want to cry. In the hallway was an absurd nightstand with some old magazines on it. Beneath the nightstand were several pairs of shoes, as shabby and as worn as the dwelling itself. Next to the nightstand hung a khaki-coloured raincoat, the kind worn by people who had to be outdoors in all kinds of weather. Peter always wore such a cloak when he went into the woods in the fall. "Is anyone in the house?" Iris called out to the inhabitants of this terrible place, and tried to move further, but immediately ran into a large box in the dark corridor, either from under the refrigerator or some other large equipment. "Who's there?" Iris heard a painfully familiar, slightly creaky voice. "Are you from the social office? I'm waiting for you. I haven't even locked the door for 2 days." The darkness of the corridor was broken by light from the second hallway, which led to the only room in the apartment. "Come in, lady. I'll take Simon to the kitchen now. How about some tea? I've got some molasses tea. It's good. And I brought lemon cookies yesterday. Simon likes them very much." The old man kept talking, and Iris stood in the hallway, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why are you crying, lady? Don't be so upset. We're doing fine. We just need to get prescriptions for strong painkillers on time, because my son screams from pain at night. They don't care at the polyclinic, and I'll come straight to you, to the Social Security office. There's a kind woman there, so she promised that one of these days they'll come to us and help us with everything. Shall I give you a cup of tea?" "Yes, and I would also like lemon cookies too. I've loved them since childhood. My name is Iris, by the way," Iris answered, sobbing, and sat down at the kitchen table. "Oh, lady, we had a neighbour girl in town when we used to live with Simon called Iris. She could eat 1/2 kilo of these same cookies at a time, and she was so small herself. How could she fit 1/2 kilo in her? She was a funny little girl, like a daughter to me. I don't know where she and her mum are now. Here's your tea." Iris took a sip of the hot drink, took a bite of a lemon cookie, and cried, "Please forgive me for forgetting you. You've always been like family to me." The old man stepped back a couple of steps and put on his glasses, which hung around his neck on a small, stretched rubber band. "Iris, is that you? It can't be." Then he ran sharply around the kitchen table, almost knocking over the same box Iris had stumbled on, and ran into the room. "Simon, look who's here! I'm going to lose my mind." Then he appeared from the shadows of the hallway, pushing, with difficulty, a huge wheelchair. In it sat a bearded man in a plaid shirt, with a plaid over his paralysed legs. The man was emaciated and absolutely indifferent to what was happening. "That's Simon, Iris. Do you remember him? He had such a terrible accident. He was a trucker. He wanted to make a lot of money. He had a beautiful wife." The old man stopped, half-heartedly, apparently touching on a subject that should not be raised in the presence of his son. "He was driving home at night in a great hurry to see his wife, when a fancy car flew towards him at breakneck speed. It was wiggling like it was trying to draw a snake with its wheels. Simon realized that there would be no space left from the car if he crushed it with his truck, so he tried to turn to the side of the road. It was raining, and he was carried into the ditch. The truck overturned, but that shameless driver didn't care. He drove on. Witnesses of the accident stopped him after 500 meters, pulled him out of the car by his chest, and he could not stand on his feet. There was a case of beer and a couple of bottles of whiskey on the back seat. He drunkenly said that he was rushing to go to his friends, and that they were waiting for him, and he didn't care that my son had suffered because of his fault." "Was there a trial?" asked Iris. "There was, of course. The expert examination indicated that he was sober, and eyewitnesses mistook lemonade for beer and Coca-Cola for whiskey. They erased his video recorder, saying it was defective. You know, he is a respected man, assistant to the deputy." Iris sat there and couldn't believe her ears. Then she called her assistant. "Ben, I need to see all my lawyers and take all available funds out of the accounts. Contact Justin Graham. Yes, with my ex. Let him prepare a place in his clinic and call for consultation with traumatologists and neurosurgeons of the capital. He will not refuse me." Iris gave out orders, nervously eating lemon cookies one by one. The funds, withdrawn from all accounts, were enough only for the operation in the leading clinic in the capital. There was no money for rehabilitation. Our heroine had invested everything in opening a 3rd branch. People were hired and they had to pay salaries. Iris took a loan against the security of the apartment and the car. "That should be enough, but this deputy's assistant will now pay for everything." The way he was spinning when he and the investigators, the prosecutor and the judge were nailed to the wall. Did you see their fat faces? Iris commented cheerfully, events that occurred during the past month. Well done to that eyewitness, who didn't give the cops his recorder and kept the record. We should thank him for not resisting these moral freaks in uniform. Ben, call Simon's firm. Tell them to drop the lawsuit, or I'll give them such an audit that bankruptcy will seem like manna from heaven. Let them collect from the real party responsible for the accident. 6 months after the spinal surgery, Simon took his first steps. Iris, you're a naughty girl. You pestered me with your whims when I was a kid, and now you've got me down to my liver. I'm still weak, it's hard for me to walk. Give me time, begged her old childhood friend. But Iris tugged him by the sleeve of his shirt, demanding that he do not sit around, and kept his exercises. Peter cried at every meeting and said, Iris, you are an angel that came down to us from heaven. I will pray to God for your welfare and health for the rest of my life. I wish your dead mother could see what a miracle she had raised. Let's go to the sea. I promised your father as a baby that I would be rich and cure him and my mum from any disease. And we'll all go to the sea together. It's a pity that my mum didn't live to see it, Iris finished sadly, and put 3 tickets on the table. I have 2 cats and a stray dog, so she will somehow survive my absence, but my animals will not, answered Peter to Iris's offer, and retreated to the kitchen to feed his animals. He had noticed long ago, back in the rehabilitation clinic, that there were feelings between the young people which were clearly different from friendship. He didn't want to disturb them. A year passed. You know, when I was confined to the wheelchair and bent over in pain, I had a vision of my mother, either in a dream or in reality. I didn't know her at all, only from the pictures that were in our house, but it was definitely her. She told me that I was not forever tied to a wheelchair, and that a woman would come and take me from it, and she would be my destiny. It's weird, isn't it? Like our loved ones wanted us to be together. What else did your mum tell you? Didn't she tell you we were having twins? Laughing, Iris asked, and ran her finger over her beloved's face. She did, and they will be sons, and they will be the most beautiful, smartest and kindest guys. But then they'll have a sister who will constantly pester them with her whims, like I was pestered by one nasty girl on the 1st floor when I was a kid, and they'll immediately stop being the kindest boys. I love you. We're going to make it work. By the way, how do you know it's twins? Did you go to the ultrasound without me? Don't tell my dad yet. It'll be a surprise. Eleanor Rossi was an ordinary middle-aged woman without any notable features. Her husband Mario Rossi, however, was of great interest to the entire public from small to great. Everyone knew and respected him, while Eleanor was just his wife, and only in this regard was she deemed worthy of attention. Once she had wanted to be someone, to develop herself, but her authoritarian husband had imposed a rigid ban on it. He wanted his wife to be his support, to take care of the house and give birth to their children. The only trouble was that, at first, Eleanor struggled to have children. This caused great pain to the unfortunate woman, who desperately dreamed of a baby. She had to endure many trials, including difficult medical treatments abroad, before the couple finally had a son. The husband was overjoyed. Finally, a son, an heir. With his arrival, Eleanor transformed even further into a melancholic housewife. Once, Eleanor had wanted to become a doctor. She even completed 2 years of medical school, but then she met her future husband and they married. All her premarital dreams were crossed out by his will. Mario Rossi, even at the beginning of their relationship, had considerable capital, which he didn't spare for his wife. To his credit, it should be noted. But there were aspects of their relationship that the current generation would describe as patriarchal, domineering, and trampling on the wife's rights. Mario expected to see his wife when he came home, wanted her to prepare his meals and serve food at the table. She was to run the household and not shift it entirely onto the shoulders of assistants, though he didn't object to them in general. For Eleanor, there was nothing terrible or suppressing about this arrangement. She had been brought up this way by her parents. The husband was the provider, while the wife played the role of homekeeper. Her parents were no longer alive, but the pattern remained. To say that she felt unhappy would be unfair to those women who truly have serious problems in marriage. Eleanor believed that she had known all the conditions and her husband's expectations from the beginning, had agreed to them, and now to complain or hope for a better lot would be unacceptable. There was a son, a husband, a huge house, and money. What was there to grieve about? Many women were far less fortunate. Eleanor and Mario's marriage had reached its 15th anniversary. Their son Ryan had already turned 5 years old, and Eleanor didn't think her fate could take a sharp turn to change something dramatically in her calm and measured life. And as always, everything began with coincidences, which, as we know, are not random at all. That day, one of her neighbours invited her to go shopping, to walk around the mall and buy something new. Although shopping wasn't Eleanor's passion, but it was a way to interact with other people, to talk, so she agreed. To her shame, Eleanor hadn't made any close friends. Therefore, she needed to get out occasionally, to talk to someone other than her family. Thus, they found themselves in the city's most expensive department store. Naturally, her neighbour didn't want to choose anything simpler. "Why limit ourselves when we deserve the best?" she said. Eleanor nodded obediently. She didn't really care. She disliked stores, regardless of their price point. They bored and exhausted her. Toward evening, the tired women wandered into the local restaurant within the shopping centre. They were terribly fatigued, the friend from her irrepressible and desperate shopping, and Eleanor from waiting at fitting rooms and carrying bags of her friend's purchases. When dinner was over and their planned goals accomplished, the women, in good spirits, headed for the exit to the parking lot. Suddenly, a gypsy woman blocked Eleanor's way, rushing to her side and separating her from her friend. "Gild my hand, my dear," she began at once, getting straight to the point. Eleanor instinctively handed her a few bills from her pocket, intended for parking. She simply didn't want to risk being cursed by that strange woman. Of course, she didn't believe in mysticism, fortune-telling, or curses, but it was still unpleasant. It was easier to give a trifling sum and receive thanks from such a person. "Here you are," Eleanor said, handing the gypsy a folded bill. Taking the money and immediately hiding it into her immense skirt, the gypsy didn't retreat. She clearly intended to say something in gratitude. "Give me your palm. I'll see, my dear. I'll tell you the whole truth. I'll reveal what was and what will be." "Thank you, but there's no need. I'm in a hurry," Eleanor interrupted, wanting to rid herself of the intrusive fortune-teller as quickly as possible. "Oh, my dear, indeed, you must hurry. See your husband, if you don't want to lose something precious. The young, beautiful blonde has had her eye on him for a long time, and her tail is wagging. She'll take him, you'll see. She'll take him." Eleanor didn't want to listen to this idle nonsense any longer. She nearly ran from the gypsy, who kept shouting after her, "Take my advice, go to him." Eleanor was close to panic, while her friend, on the other hand, stood frozen like a pillar, mouth agape, listening to the gypsy's speeches and predictions. Eleanor grabbed her arm and dragged her to the car, hoping the gypsy wouldn't follow. "Did you believe her?" the friend asked as they pulled out of the parking lot. "Come on, who would believe that?" Eleanor grinned back with a hint of bravado, but even as she spoke, Eleanor realized she was one of those who did believe. The gypsy's words had planted seeds of doubt, and Eleanor knew these seeds would germinate and grow like a cancer, poisoning everything inside her. It happened exactly as she'd predicted to herself. No matter how hard she tried to chase the thoughts away, it didn't work. Eleanor constantly dwelled on what the gypsy had told her. It was impossible to forget those casually thrown words. Anxiety tormented Eleanor, giving her no rest. In truth, Eleanor had never suspected her husband of cheating. She herself was not jealous and was restrained in her emotions. Mario had never given her reason to doubt him. Of course, there were situations that might alert a jealous woman: absences, business trips, working late nights. Yet all this happened. But he truly worked hard and long. After all, he had more than one business on his shoulders, and he personally supervised everything, not delegating decision-making to managers. A man with such a workload and level of involvement simply couldn't work from 9 to 6. It was nonsense to expect him to fit into a standard workday. As a reasonable woman, Eleanor understood this perfectly well. It never occurred to her to make a scene, interrogate him about their relationship, or, God forbid, check his phone. To stoop to such vulgar behaviour would be beneath her dignity. It would humiliate her first and foremost. Hypothetically, somewhere deep in her soul, she sometimes allowed the thought that her husband might not be entirely physically faithful. Perhaps he had occasional flings for fun and distraction, but her spouse was smart enough to hide well, and she was smart enough not to dig. But the gypsy was talking about something else. A one-time physical infidelity is one thing, and it's quite another to know for certain that your spouse has a permanent mistress he might leave you for. This long business trip, during which her husband had been away for almost a month, also added to her doubts and suspicions. And how did the gypsy know Eleanor needed to go to him? How had she learned he was away from home? According to Mario's explanation to his wife, they were building an addition to the existing factory in a small town, which required his personal presence. He explained at length that the project required approvals and decisions, and it would be better to personally control what could bring bags of money in profits or losses. It sounded extremely reasonable and convincing, until Eleanor heard the gypsy's words. Damn her! Eleanor cursed herself and everything around her. Why did I give in and go to that unfortunate shopping centre? Scolding herself or not, what's done was done. For the first time, Eleanor seriously contemplated her husband's fidelity and his hobbies. It would have been 1,000 times easier to ignore it all, but now that was simply impossible. The thought burrowed into her brain like an intrusive worm. There was no way to shake it off. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, Eleanor decided she couldn't continue like this. She needed to solve the problem decisively. She had to go to her husband and see for herself. Whatever she might find couldn't be worse than what she was experiencing now. Oh, how naive she was. How simple-mindedly deluded. But decision made. There was no turning back. On the journey to the city where her husband was staying, Eleanor was on pins and needles. It wasn't just the unknown that frightened her now, but also what she might see. She was literally shaking from stress and worry. Finally, approaching the city's best hotel, where her husband was lodging, Eleanor sat in her car for about 15 minutes, clutching the steering wheel tightly. She couldn't bring herself to get out and go inside. She stared at the entrance with unseeing eyes, her gaze frozen. Finally, Eleanor crawled out of the car on unsteady legs, struggling with each step. Entering the hotel, she forced herself to appear confident. Since she had decided to come here, everything should look natural from the outside. She bypassed the receptionist to avoid alerting her husband and headed straight for the most luxurious suite in the hotel. Mario always favoured comfort and convenience, never one to limit himself. After exiting the elevator on the desired floor, she paused to catch her breath. Her ragged breathing stemmed from stress, not exertion. Approaching his room, Eleanor listened intently. She heard two voices discussing something, punctuated by laughter. Mario wasn't alone, but the muffled sounds made it impossible to identify who was with him. It could be his mistress, a colleague, or even a subordinate handling urgent matters. Perhaps it was a remote conversation with only a virtual interlocutor. Eleanor's imagination ran wild. It could even be housekeeping, as such a large suite typically required 2 cleaners. To end her torment, the woman steeled herself and knocked firmly. The door swung open, revealing a young, beautiful blonde, just as the gypsy in the parking lot had prophesied. The girl's attire, a short robe, left no doubt about her intimate relationship with Eleanor's husband. "What do you want?" the blonde asked, her eyes narrowing in confusion. Eleanor was speechless, utterly shocked and unprepared for this confrontation. They stood in silence, sizing each other, until Mario appeared behind the blonde's back, dressed only in his underwear and an open robe. His nonchalant demeanour crushed any hope of a misunderstanding. Seemingly unsurprised and unperturbed, Mario carelessly addressed his wife. "Eleanor, it's you. Come in." Like a sleepwalker, Eleanor obeyed, barely aware of her actions. Come in, dear wife, sit down." Mario's voice sounded hollow. Eleanor sank into the chair, utterly dejected. She couldn't fathom why she stayed. Everything was painfully clear, and she had no desire to hear explanations or apologies, which, judging by his tone, weren't forthcoming anyway. Mario's demeanour was far from that of a guilty, ashamed husband caught in adultery. "Well," he spoke again, "why have you come? Good. Now you have seen everything, but I don't understand why you have to be such a fool. Please enlighten me." Eleanor sat silently, at a loss for words. Even if she knew what to say, she lacked the strength to utter a response. "Sharon and I were having such a great time, and here you are, trying to ruin everything. Right, baby?" "You bet." The blonde named Sharon laughed, looking triumphantly at the defeated wife. "I'm not going to make excuses, there's no point. It's not my fault. A man, my dear, is polygamous by nature. He gets bored, especially with a cold grey mouse like you. You're a good mother and a good hostess, I'll give you that. You were wise as a wife when you didn't try to meddle in my life. What am I supposed to do now?" He seemed to be asking himself. "We have only two options now, Eleanor. Either you go home quietly, wiping away your tears, and everything remains as it was. We live parallel lives, you in wealth and with our son. Or you proudly file for divorce, but I'm warning you, that will be the last proud thing you ever do. After the divorce, you'll be working as a garbage collector. You won't get any money. And most importantly," he grinned, "my son will stay with me. Any court will choose me over you. Trust me." "I had no idea you were such a jerk, Mario." The words slipped out unbidden. It was an emotional outburst, and Eleanor immediately regretted it. Mario stood up, and with lightning speed delivered a resounding, humiliating slap to his wife. For the first time in his life, he had struck her. And how? In front of his mistress, who was first stunned by surprise, then laughed. One could hardly imagine a greater humiliation. "I've given you options for now. If you say anything else in a similar vein, there will be only one option left. Do you understand me?" Mario hissed, savouring his power. He was energized and invigorated by his mistress's reaction. It was a one-man show, and he was revelling in the spotlight. Eleanor looked up fearfully at her husband, who still loomed over her. She held her hand to the spot where he had struck her. The woman simply couldn't believe this was happening, that this was the behaviour of a man she had lived with for 15 years, and apparently never truly known. Eleanor sat, frightened, looking at her husband and his Sharon, who gazed at her haughtily. Her thoughts raced frantically. She tried urgently to decide how best to behave here and now, to avoid getting herself into more trouble. "All right, I understand," Eleanor said quietly, her voice filled with resignation. "And what do you decide?" Her spouse continued to press her. Sharon froze, waiting for an answer. Apparently, she desperately wanted the old wife to leave so she could take her place. The little fool didn't realize that she could end up in Eleanor's position later, just as humiliated and trampled. Eleanor had no way out and no chance to show her pride. "The first option you proposed? No divorce," the broken spouse said tiredly and with a sense of doom. "That's good. You're a wise woman after all. I wasn't wrong." The husband nodded, satisfied. Sharon shot a lightning glare at her rival, but Eleanor was already indifferent to it. "Shall I go home?" the wife asked hesitantly. More than anything in the world, she wanted to leave this place as soon as possible. "Of course. Wait for me with our kid. I'll be back from my business trip soon." The husband chuckled, even kissing his wife on the cheek. Eleanor once again felt disgusted, as if she'd been bathed in mud. On cotton legs, moving solely on moral willpower, she got up from the chair. The way to the car seemed like a walk of shame. It felt as if everyone she passed mocked her, almost pointing fingers. When she reached the car and got in, she burst into tears from the powerlessness and humiliation felt by every cell of her body. The woman was in total despair. There were no thoughts in her head, only horror and panic, which overshadowed all other feelings and emotions. She couldn't stop crying for half an hour, couldn't bring herself to calm down. All her feelings blended into a tangled mess she was unable to unravel. There was no strength for anything. They had lived so many years in marriage, been through so much together. A few hours ago, Eleanor couldn't have imagined such behaviour from Mario, even in her worst nightmares. She didn't know this man at all. Infidelity, even long-term with a permanent mistress, was certainly vile, horrible, and humiliating in itself, but compared to the rest, it was just the tip of the iceberg. The slap, the sneers, the endless humiliation in front of a juvenile little brat who was allowed to laugh at his wife. And then there were the threats. It was absolutely destroying her. Mario had offered her a choice without a choice. For all the previous 15 years of marriage, Eleanor simply hadn't known him, and now that she did, she didn't want to be his wife for another day. But this threat to take away her son, money, and lack of work be damned. But her son, there was no way she could abandon him. Judging by his tone and the demonstrative slap, Mario was dead serious. Eleanor had agreed to his terms just to buy time. She didn't know what to do, but she had to think of something for the sake of her child. Leaving him with Mario meant not only a painful separation for Eleanor and Ryan, but also that her husband would mould the boy in his own image. Having gotten to know her husband better, she was not at all ready for her son to become like such a father. She would do everything in her power to prevent that from happening. The decision seemed obvious. Given Mario's money and connections, there was nothing else to do but run away. Run away without looking back, taking her son with her immediately. There was simply no chance of winning against her spouse in a custody battle. Eleanor understood this clearly. The advantage in influence and opportunities was obscenely colossal. Even if she believed in the most humane and incorruptible court in the world, guided only by the boy's interests, it wouldn't stop Mario from constantly communicating with and influencing the child. After today's scene, it was clear that such communication would be harmful to Ryan. When Eleanor processed all these thoughts and realized that making any other decision simply wouldn't work, it became somewhat easier to come to terms with it. Now, it was just a matter of creating a detailed escape plan. In words alone, it's easy to decide to run away, but when you start to reason, you realize that there are a huge number of pressing problems, and without solving them, running is simply pointless. She had to solve the money problems. Withdrawing funds from a card linked to her husband's account was foolish. Moreover, which was much more difficult, she would need to obtain new documents. She couldn't leave with her old passport. Her husband's men were coming for her in an hour, and they'd be able to make her regret not only what she did, but that she was ever born. There was no doubt about it. For her son's sake, Eleanor was willing to take the risk. There was no other choice. She needed to find someone who could make new documents for both her and Ryan. During her marriage, Eleanor had lost touch with almost all her childhood and youth acquaintances and friends, so she couldn't think of anyone to ask for help in this risky endeavour. Suddenly she remembered a classmate's words about her old school friend. Meg now lives with some kind of criminal. Maybe try going to them. While there are no other options, there's no choice. Eleanor didn't even notice when she reached the suburban village where she lived. She drove on autopilot, her thoughts far away. Passing through the internal security post, she was jolted back to reality when she saw a familiar face. It was Peter, a guy from her childhood neighbourhood. He now worked as a shift supervisor in the settlement security, having previously been a police officer. Maybe I should approach him first, Eleanor thought. That's a better option than an unknown criminal. Anyone could betray me and inform my husband. Her illusions were gone. She no longer wore rose-coloured glasses. Deciding to take the chance, Eleanor stopped her car just past the checkpoint, parked and walked back. She peeked into the security room, where two unfamiliar men sat staring at monitors, watching surveillance cameras. At a table behind them she spotted Peter. "Good evening, Peter. May I speak with you for a few minutes, please?" "Hello?" Everyone present looked up from their work, surprised to see Eleanor at their workplace. "Yes, Mrs. Rossi, one moment," Peter replied. Eleanor went outside and moved about 10 metres away from the checkpoint building. Peter approached her shortly after. "Mrs. Rossi, how can I help you?" the shift supervisor asked warily. "Peter, please drop the formalities." "So, the problem isn't with my work or the guys?" "There's no problem at all." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I'm making a personal request." "I'll help you in any way I can." "Well, it's quite complicated." Eleanor nervously rubbed her ringed hand. Only now was she realizing the gravity of her situation. If something went wrong, her husband's promised job as a cleaner would seem to her like manna from heaven. "Peter, I realize we have never been close friends, and I probably don't have the right to make such requests. First, I want to ask for your word that even if you can't or won't help me, everything said will remain between us. This is a matter of life and death for me and my child. I'm not exaggerating." "You remember I'm not one to talk?" The man nodded, but seeing Eleanor's expectant pause, he added, "All right, you have my word." Eleanor exhaled, though it did little to ease her tension. She hesitantly began recounting the day's events and describing Mario's behaviour in detail. Peter listened without interrupting, wondering why she was telling him all this and how he could possibly help. Meanwhile, Eleanor had moved on to the options her spouse had presented her. "You must understand, it's impossible," Eleanor complained. "I suppose, but what can I do?" Peter was puzzled by the sudden appearance of a childhood acquaintance and her frank disclosure of personal matters. "I've decided to run away with my son, but you know, Mario, I need new documents, or he'll find me within a day." "Are you kidding me?" Peter recoiled in shock. "I know it's illegal." "It's a crime, Eleanor." "That's why I said I have no right to ask you, but I have no one else to turn to. I'm afraid I don't have much time. Soon my husband will take my son away from me. I lied about accepting his terms, but he's not a fool. He's known me for so many years. He realizes I can't forgive and forget, and his girlfriend is eager to take my place. Time's running out. I don't know what to do." Eleanor suddenly burst into tears, though she thought she had cried herself out that afternoon. Peter was completely confused. He didn't know what to do. He didn't want to contribute to a crime, even if for a good cause. Then he immediately realized that if Eleanor and her son went missing, Mario Rossi would start searching, and their tearful conversation, happening right now under the cameras, would not go unnoticed. "So, Eleanor, first, I'm not promising anything, and I need to think it over. Secondly, you're going to come with me to the room with guys and tell them publicly that you've seen a stray puppy nearby and ask them to report it to you if they find it. And do this in tears." Eleanor looked uncomprehending. "What puppy? What do you mean?" she interjected. "Don't be silly. This conversation we're having, whatever it leads to, is seen, at least those who are inside now and watching us on the cameras. You don't want to set me up either. Third, Once I decide something, whatever it is, I'll find a way to contact you without anyone finding out. Do we have a deal? I'll try not to take too long." He replied to the mute question in his interlocutor's eyes.
"Okay, I'll be very grateful to you. Thank you so much, Peter. Even if you won't help, thank you for listening and for not telling anyone. I believe you."
Then everything went on as Peter had asked. Eleanor entered the room and addressed the guys, telling them about the sad story of a certain grey puppy, hungry and sick, who needed help. She promised to thank whoever saw him and reported it to her. "That's it for today," Eleanor decided once she was in her room. She was exhausted, both physically and mentally. She just wanted to wash off the whole disgusting day and go to sleep. Moreover, she was now bound until Peter appeared with his decision. She prayed that he would agree to help her, that Peter wouldn't say no. She realized that turning to a criminal, a boyfriend of a school friend, was a completely desperate option that could end in disaster. Of course, if there was no other choice. Okay, for now, we have to hope for the best outcome. All the time, Eleanor was like on pins and needles, but she tried not to show it to others, even the servants in the house. Now she suspected everyone, fearing they might report to their master. There was no way she could give herself away ahead of time. Mario was cunning as a fox, with excellent instincts. So it was very desirable that he delay his arrival as long as possible, enjoying the company of his beautiful young Sharon. It would only be to his wife's advantage. Almost 3 days passed, and Eleanor slowly began to despair. Everything she had planned began to seem unfulfilled and unrealistic. Depression and apathy began to set in. Peter pulled her out of this state with his sudden message. From an unknown number she received a text. "In our yard at 1700. She immediately realized it was him. There was no doubt that he meant the yard where she and the man grew up and met. Without hesitation, Eleanor drove there by 5 p.m. Peter was already sitting on the bench outside her building entrance waiting. "Hello, Eleanor." The man started the conversation. She tried to understand from his voice, tone and intonation what decision he had made. "I won't hide it. I've been thinking for a very long time, and my decision has to be based on more than just your story. I hope you'll understand. I've been careful to strike up conversation with guards from other shifts about Mario and your family in general. Some are familiar with the guards at your house and his personal bodyguard, Hank. It turns out that you're not yet aware of the scale of your problems. You're seeing only the tip of the iceberg. I don't want to scare you, but I've been told that Mr. Rossi intends to marry Sharon and is working hard on the legal aspects of the divorce behind your back." "How?" Eleanor began. "Trust me, men gossip no less than women. They know everything about everyone." Eleanor gasped as if she had been hit. She had felt it, but guessing and knowing were not of the same order. "You realize now that I have no other choice," the woman said with difficulty. "Probably yes. And time is short too," the man nodded. "I'm going to ask you straight out. Will you help me?" "I have to help you after everything I found out. I'd be glad to refuse, and my conscience would bite me if I did." Peter smiled. "I'm ready to hug you." "Please stay calm. Everything should look very neutral from the outside. I'm sitting in my yard, and we met by chance and got to talking about life. We don't know anything. You could be followed, actually." "Right. Sorry." Eleanor hadn't thought of that at all. "So, to the point. What you asked for both you and Ryan, will cost a substantial amount of money. So, now you will carefully but quickly attend to collecting money and the rest of the essentials. I warn you that you can't take more than 1 bag with you. Hank let it slip that your husband has already found a private clinic for the mentally ill and fabricated a whole dossier on you by bribing the right people that you were a sick person in need of treatment. He's going to put you there to avoid sharing his fortune and custody of his son. We have a week at most. I'll try to organise everything earlier, but I'm planning for a departure 5 nights from today. I'll have the night off. It turns out to be Wednesday night through Thursday." The rest of their conversation focused on how to leave the settlement at night unnoticed with the boy, and Peter's plans for their departure and destination. "I'll drop you off at the bus station, and from there you can find your own route. I advise you to change trains frequently, drive and switch again, to confuse your trail as much as possible. Just don't search for anything online from your phone or at home on your Wi-Fi. Please, be cautious and don't make any mistakes. If you get caught, I'll be totally screwed too. And think of Ryan. He's all I think about." "Okay. If everything works out, I'll drive by your house next Wednesday at 11:30 sharp. It will be a conditional sign. If I don't show up, then it's postponed, and I'll provide you more information later. Got it memorized?" "How can I not remember when my whole life depends on it?" The next few days until Wednesday, Eleanor acted with extreme caution and tried to behave as casually as possible with everyone so as not to arouse suspicion. She managed to pawn her jewellery, but was offered much less than she had hoped for. After paying for documents, there would be very little left, but she had no choice. Eleanor had been reading a book on the veranda since 11 o'clock, terribly afraid of missing Peter's appearance and his conditional signal. But he was incredibly precise and punctual, passing her house at exactly 12:30, as arranged beforehand. Suddenly, the woman was seized by complete panic. She had only taken the initial steps to escape. It hadn't seemed so serious, and the full realization hadn't hit her. In 1 second, she suddenly realized that tonight she would become a fugitive along with her son, alone, almost without money, with not her real documents. Only now did she begin to wonder if she was making a mistake, if she was doing something stupid. It appeared to her that she was saving Ryan, but what if it was the opposite? What if she was taking him away from opportunities and money to a miserable unknown? A moment of self-doubt was interrupted by the memory of the slap, and in general of her last meeting with her husband and his terrible plan. Events had spun so quickly after that Eleanor had somewhat dulled those feelings and emotions. When they came again, there was no doubt. She didn't want her son to be raised by a monster. Yes, and taking into account Peter's story and information, her husband was even worse than she had imagined. Eleanor was also very frightened by the conversation she would need to have with the boy himself. He loved his father, although he appeared in his life infrequently, and was attached to him. How could she explain such complex and dramatic life changes to a 5-year-old boy? How to explain that they had to run away, that they would now have different lives, that their living conditions would be very different? There were so many questions without answers. She also had to pick up the boy in the middle of the night and leave quietly without causing a commotion in the house. The woman came up with the idea to wake her son and offer him a game, to become treasure hunters and go explore the forest at night. He should like it, especially since they had recently finished the book Treasure Island, which he really enjoyed. Having put her son to bed, Eleanor planned to sleep at least a little to gather strength, but it was impossible. Headache, high blood pressure, nausea, stress and panic came in waves, incapacitating her body. After lying in bed for a few hours, she silently dressed in a sports suit she had prepared in advance and brought a sports bag from the dressing room. She had hidden a minimal set of things for herself and Ryan, as well as some essential items. Sighing and praying, she quietly left the bedroom, heading to the children's room. Her son was sleeping peacefully and sweetly. It was a shame to wake him, but there was no choice. "Ryan," his mother called to him in a gentle and calm voice, pulling herself together so as not to show alarm. "Ryan," she repeated. But the boy did not wake up. He was too deeply immersed in the realm of Morpheus. She had to nudge him a little.
"Yes? What is it? Morning already?"
the child finally replied in a sleepy voice.
"No, dear, but remember how you wanted to go on a treasure hunt."
When he heard those words, sleep fell away from the child. He opened his eyes wide and looked at his mother.
"I thought we could go exploring at night. What do you think?"
Seeing that the boy was ready to scream with joy, Eleanor instantly put her finger to her mouth, making a silence sign.
"Kid, we have to act quietly. No one must know about our secret plan."
"Yes," the son replied in a whisper.
"Then get dressed and let's go quickly. Just remember, we have to be like mice, keeping quiet while talking and moving around. Deal?"
The boy was so taken with the idea that he decided to only nod in response, so as not to make any unnecessary noise. At last they left his room. Eleanor held the boy's hand tightly and led the way stealthily. She knew how to leave the house without waking the staff, and most importantly the guards. By the fence there was a blind spot the owners knew about and kept meaning to fix with new cameras, but never got around to. Luckily, the fence's grating allowed both mother and son to climb over easily without special tools.
"Where are we going?"
Ryan whispered as they approached the forest beyond the settlement's protected boundaries. To his credit, he hadn't uttered a sound until now, silently following his mother's command for adventure.
"To meet adventure, Sonny,"
Eleanor answered cryptically, which satisfied her son completely. He happily walked on without further questions or seeking details. After climbing through the gap in the fence, they had about 10 more minutes to go. Eleanor decided to explain at least something to her son while they were alone.
"Kid, we need to talk to you like an adult. You're a big boy now, aren't you?"
"Of course," Ryan replied, unsuspecting.
"Look, you must understand that in life, events don't always unfold as we want them to. Sometimes we're powerless to control what happens. That's our situation now. We need to go far away, but the good news is we're going to be real spies, just like in the movies. We'll live under other names, and it'll be our secret."
Eleanor waited anxiously for the child's reaction. At first, joy flickered across his face, an expectation of adventure, but then his expression changed abruptly, and he asked a question that pained her deeply.
"What about Daddy?"
the little boy asked innocently.
"You see, Daddy has his own role. He unfortunately can't come with us,"
Eleanor hedged.
"But he'll come back?" "He'll try. He'll try very hard."
Eleanor didn't lie.
"But isn't it exciting that you and I will be like real spies, hiding and changing our names?" she asked hopefully.
"Yes, it's great." The boy was clearly glad, but his father's absence, already a sore point, now seemed even more unsettling with the prospect of no contact. Eleanor tried to change the subject.
"Kitten, we're about to meet our friend who'll give us our new papers. We'll learn our new names and use them, even in private, so we don't blow our secret mission. Can you do that?"
"But I'll still be able to call you Mum, won't I?" the boy asked anxiously.
"Of course, son. And I'll call you Son. Kitten, just like before. But sometimes, especially in public, or when someone might overhear us, we'll use our new names. Can you remember that?"
Being entrusted with such responsibility thrilled the boy, and he rejoiced. Eleanor felt it even distracted him a bit from his sad thoughts about his father.
"Yes! Hooray!" "Well done. Good for you."
Finally they reached the clearing, where Peter waited, not in his car. Eleanor again marvelled at her luck that he had agreed to help. He knew how the search would proceed and had prepared extensively, even with the new documents. As planned, Peter took mother and son to the bus station. Now, her name was Kelly, and her son's Tom. Her passport showed no marriage stamp, and Ryan, now Tom's, birth certificate had a dash instead of his father's name. Can you manage without this money, Eleanor? If you need. Peter began when the woman handed him money. Come on, I owe you enough. I have enough to cover a room and essentials for the first time. I'll look for work once I've enrolled my son in kindergarten. All right, don't forget the names. Ryan, you have a very secret mission. Mum explained it, right? It's crucial. You've been chosen from many people, and you can't let us down. Understand? Yes, of course. I'm Tom. My mum is Kelly. Our family name is Hanson, and my birthday is now November the 25th. I'm 3 years younger. I remember everything, the boy recited confidently. Well done, boy, Peter encouraged, making Eleanor's son blush. Eleanor, do you remember how to contact me if needed? Of course, she smiled, glancing at the little and adult man. Don't worry. Thank you so much for everything. The main thing is to be happy. Good luck to you both. After a touching farewell, mother and son boarded their bus. Mum, who was that? The boy asked. That's our supervisor, but shh. The child quickly embraced his role and didn't ask many questions, even when they changed buses 4 times. Still at home, Eleanor had chosen a suitable city, looked at the real estate market there and looked at a few tiny apartments, arranging a viewing for Friday. They only needed to reach their destination. Her son's behaviour was surprising. He wasn't capricious or whiny. Instead, he asked questions and calmly endured all difficulties, especially since the unhealthy fast food, usually limited to twice a year, delighted him immensely. What pleased Ryan terrified his mother. Eleanor panicked frequently, constantly imagining people who might recognise her or her son and inform her husband. The feeling of being fugitive criminals haunted the unhappy woman relentlessly. Arriving at the station in the city Eleanor had chosen for their new life, she felt slightly relieved. The main challenges of their escape were behind them. They decided to stay in the first place they saw. It was clean with 1 bedroom, and the neighbours seemed decent and friendly. The little boy was initially surprised that their living space had shrunk tenfold, but upon seeing a child his age among the neighbours, he quickly adjusted. With help from a neighbour, another single mother, with whom Eleanor befriended, she quickly enrolled Ryan in kindergarten and got a job as a cleaner lady at the nearby city hospital. Mario's prophecy came true. I'm actually a cleaner, she smirked sadly to herself. But this didn't discourage her. She was prepared for it and had chosen this path. Despite the emerging problems, Eleanor remained resolute, grateful that everything was going as planned, that her son was with her, and that she needed nothing else. Life gradually improved. They befriended their neighbour Jessica, who seemed to have many useful social connections for both Eleanor's employment and her son's arrangements. Jessica, a local and very active woman, took Eleanor under her wing and helped as much as she could. Eleanor tried to reciprocate, baking homemade pies for Jessica and her daughter, and babysitting when needed. It wasn't a problem for Eleanor, as Jessica's daughter Holly and Ryan got along well, playing together happily. Eleanor also befriended a retired military man, Mr. Warren, who was about 35 years her senior, and looked after her in a fatherly way. Eleanor learned he had no family, which explained his attachment to them, genuine and paternal, without any impropriety. He worried about them and always tried to make their lives easier. Though Eleanor hadn't told him anything directly, Mr. Warren, with his wisdom and experience, seemed to have guessed much of their situation. After all, no one suddenly flees to another town with just a child, 1 bag, without reason. However, the locals had enough tact and respect for Eleanor not to ask unnecessary questions or pry into her past. Overall, life began to improve. Though adjusting to more modest financial circumstances was challenging, Eleanor had consciously chosen this path and wasn't afraid of hard physical labour. It was difficult, but the hospital staff and patients were mostly friendly, and she found satisfaction in making their lives easier, a feeling often missing from her previous life. Ryan, given his age, adapted well to their new circumstances. However, he had never before experienced apartments in old buildings or such modest living conditions. From birth, he had been accustomed to nannies, cleaners and cooks. Even though Eleanor had tried not to spoil him, the drop in their standard of living was dramatic and noticeable. He remained silent and bore the hardships courageously, but his mother noticed his unspoken reactions, which pained her. At times, Eleanor panicked, wondering if she had overreacted, if things hadn't been so terrible, if Mario hadn't been such a bad father, and if she had taken Ryan away needlessly. She was deeply troubled by the fact that she couldn't provide her son with the comfort, standard of living, and opportunities his father could have offered. One day, Jessica found Eleanor pondering these thoughts on the bench in front of the playground. "Why are you so down in the dumps, friend?" she asked, cheerful as always. "Oh," Eleanor hesitated, then decided to confide in her. She was tired of bearing the weight of responsibility and guilt alone. She needed someone to evaluate her actions. "You know, we ran away from my husband. I felt I had no choice. He had backed me into a corner. But now I'm wondering if I made a mistake. At least my son would have had opportunities and an education with his father. What can I give him on a cleaner's salary?" She smiled sadly. "If you decided to change your life so drastically, you must have had excellent reasons," Jessica reasonably suggested. "I did, but now I'm thinking about my son's future. Was I too hasty? Perhaps he would have been better off there, better off than with me." "A child is happy where he is loved and cared for. I'm sure if you've already made such a drastic change, something terrible must have happened in your life. You also say you had an excuse. Where's the guarantee he wouldn't do the same thing to a child? I see how hard you work every single day to make sure he has everything. You're a good mum, and don't you dare scold yourself," Jessica added empathetically. "Yeah, I guess." "Stop this self-abuse. It's done. It's already done. There's no point in nagging yourself and thinking about how to do it this way or that way. It's already decided and cut off long ago." The conversation with Jessica greatly supported Eleanor's fighting spirit, which had already begun to waver. After all, her friend was right. The woman had made a choice, and now there was no point in ruminating it. It was necessary to stand up and fight for Ryan, to grow up in the best possible conditions, loved and nurtured by his mother's attention. Besides, the boy's behaviour exceeded Eleanor's expectations. Sometimes it even seemed to her that he was so happy about the new life that he liked it even more than the previous one. Perhaps he had missed the freedom, lightness, and socializing with other kids before. Back then, life had been scheduled to the minute, like an adult's. Lessons, endless activities. Of course, the child couldn't be deprived of childhood, but Mario was impossible to change. Cartoons were strictly limited to 20 minutes a day, and informal communication with other kids was only on Sundays, and even then, the circle of children consisted of Mario's friends' children. Eleanor was tired of arguing with her husband about this. He was raising a businessman from diapers. That fateful day, Eleanor, as usual, came back late from the night shift. On days like this, when she couldn't pick up Ryan from his lessons, Jessica helped her out. They generally helped each other out a lot, swapping and taking turns babysitting. When the woman arrived, her son was already asleep. She was preparing to wash up and lie down when her eye caught the diploma. It turned out that Tom Hanson had been awarded in a fine arts competition for children under 7 years old. Eleanor smiled and glowed with joy and happiness. She decided that in the morning she should certainly praise the boy and ask him what he wanted as a present. In the morning, as usual, they gathered at the table. Not only Eleanor and her son, but also Jessica and Holly. They had long ago agreed with the neighbour to take turns cooking to relieve each other a little. Jessica had made delicious porridge, and the four of them had breakfast with it. "By the way, Tom, I saw your diploma last night. You're so good. What did you draw?" Eleanor asked to support her son in his first success. "The subject of the drawing should be related to a mother. It's your portrait." The son smiled modestly in reply. "Oh, that's doubly nice. Well, now think and choose your present. I can't help but encourage your new talent, especially if it's so successful. I can't wait to see your drawing," Eleanor half-jokingly teased. "And you can look on the internet now," Holly suddenly said. "Yes, Kelly, exactly. They published the picture, and Tom's picture with a diploma on the site." Eleanor continued to smile until the meaning of what had just been said began to sink in. "What?" she asked incredulously. "Yes, look here." Jessica showed her something on her phone, holding it out, and it was printed in the local news. "So, the kid is a celebrity now. There's a picture in the newspaper and on their portal." The woman turned pale and trembled. She instantly realized that it was necessary to urgently pack their things. "Jessica, let's go quickly. Let's step outside for a minute. It's very urgent." The neighbour was startled by her friend's look and immediately jumped up and ran out after her. They stood in the hallway and talked as quietly as possible. "You don't know everything. We're wanted by my husband. I had to get new documents. My husband is Mario Rossi. You must have heard of him. My name is really Eleanor. My son's name is Ryan. I'm sure people are tracking information about us day and night in case we suddenly appear." Jessica stood and stared at her neighbour with her mouth open in amazement. She couldn't even imagine such a thing. "We must leave urgently. We have no other choice. My husband had a plan to lock me up in a mental institution, so he ran. If he finds me now, he'll ruin me and take my son." "Oh my God! What can I do to help?" "Please, call Ryan back while I pack the essentials." "Damn, he knows our new names too. We need to get out of here now." Without a word, Jessica returned to the kitchen. Eleanor heard her calmly explaining something to the children. She rushed to their room to gather documents, their emergency cash, and bare necessities. Every second counted. Suddenly, the door opened behind her. Her heart nearly stopped, but it was only Mr. Warren's voice. "Kelly, I know everything. How can I help?" "Help?" Eleanor asked fearfully, glancing back without pausing her work. "You and Jessica only thought you were speaking quietly. I'm ready to help any way I can." The retired military man was serious and ready for action. "If you insist, could you drive us to any nearby town? We need to get far away from here." "I can take you to my friend's country house. No one will find you there. Perfect for hiding out." "Mr. Warren, thank you so much. I'll just take a few minutes to pack essentials." "All right, daughter. I'll get dressed quickly, too." 2 minutes later, they met in the hallway. Eleanor rushed to Jessica's kitchen for Ryan. "Ryan, let's go. We need to leave right away." Everyone looked frightened, especially Holly, who knew Ryan as Tom. She gazed around, utterly bewildered. Fortunately, though scared, Ryan didn't ask questions and behaved admirably. He obediently rose and went to his mother, but upon reaching her, he pressed against her stomach and cried, "Is it my fault, Mummy? Did I give us away?" "No, kitten, of course not. I didn't think this through." Eleanor knew time was scarce, but she had to calm her child. She crouched before him and spoke softly. "Don't worry. I can fix this, trust me. It's a problem, but not a disaster. We can sort everything out, but we must hurry, okay? I'll explain later, sweetie." The boy calmed down, wiping his tears. Eleanor relaxed slightly, slowing her pace. Suddenly, Mr. Warren appeared. "Kelly, we can't use the main exit. There's an unfamiliar car at the entrance. Look carefully." Eleanor's heart, which had just steadied, raced again. Panic rising, she stumbled to the kitchen overlooking the entrance. Be careful not to be seen, the military man cautioned. Eleanor's hopes sank. Sure enough, her husband's car was there. He was likely inside with his bodyguard, Hank. More than enough trouble. The woman began to spiral into panic and despair. "Wait!" Jessica called. "There's a fire escape in the bedroom window. You can use it to get down." "Perfect," Mr. Warren exclaimed. Eleanor took a deep breath, considering her options. There was no alternative. Mr. Warren decided to go first, in case the ladder was unstable. Once down, he gave a thumbs up and hurried for the car. Eleanor instructed Ryan. "Sweetie, I'll go down first, then you, all right? Don't worry, the stairs are strong. They held Mr. Warren. I'll wait for you below, and Jessica will watch from here." Soon they were both on the ground, Ryan behaving bravely without a whimper. They waited a couple of minutes for Mr. Ryan to arrive with the car. Jessica and Holly watched anxiously from above, silently waving goodbye. Mr. Warren drove up swiftly, and Eleanor grabbed her son and jumped into the back seat. Immediately, she heard a shout. "It's them! They're getting away!" It was Hank, her husband's guard. There was no doubt about it. She would have recognized that voice out of 1,000. He was standing on the corner, apparently checking the perimeter of the house. "God," Eleanor thought to herself, "I barely have time to breathe before something else happens. When will it all end?" Aloud she said, "Mr. Warren, can we escape?" "I'll try my hardest," the man replied, concentrating. "Hold on tight, both of you." "Son, please hold on to me and don't be afraid of anything, okay? Everything's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine," the woman said like a mantra, although she didn't believe a word of it herself. They slowly drove out of the yard and travelled about 200 metres when Eleanor spotted her husband's car in the rearview mirror. He was in the driver's seat. She saw his face, and her heart shrank to the size of a matchbox. Strangely, Hank wasn't in the car. Apparently Mario didn't want to waste precious seconds waiting for him. Fear crept up her spine. The woman began to vividly imagine what they would do to her. Convinced her death would be long and agonizing. Her husband's car was approaching, the distance between them shrinking rapidly. Suddenly, Mr. Warren made a sharp right turn, so abrupt that the woman and her son were thrown across the seat by inertia. They swerved into an alley, and Mario didn't have time to react. Eleanor closed her eyes and began to pray, frantically recalling all the prayers she knew, and clutched Ryan even tighter to herself. His heart was racing too. He was also terrified, which was understandable. The car bounced over potholes, tossing the woman and her son from one side to the other. Mr. Warren drove like a madman. His goal was not to surrender, and he was determined to achieve it at any cost. As they pulled onto the road again, Eleanor wanted to exhale, but a moment later she saw her husband's car behind them once more. He had fallen behind slightly, but hadn't lost sight of them. "Damn, he's persistent," Mr. Warren cursed loudly. It was clear he would have used stronger language to describe Mario, but he spared the child's innocent ears. "Maybe we should stop if there's no chance," Eleanor cried out desperately. She had lost all hope for the best. "So he can kill you? Why do you think he's chasing us?" Mr. Warren clarified the situation. "Forgive me, please. I might sound like the most ungrateful person, but I'm afraid of crashing. And I don't care what happens to me, but my son—" "No one's going to crash. I'll make sure of that. Wait, my dear, don't distract me. This reminds me of combat patrols in my youth." The woman decided to stay quiet. She would have preferred to surrender, but her opinion was no longer considered. A retired colonel was in command now. "Mum, why is Dad chasing us? Were we hiding from him?" "I'm sure this is the worst time and place for an explanation, but this might be my last chance to tell you my side of the story. You see, Ryan, your father hurt me emotionally. That is, he hurt me inside, in my soul, and physically. He hit me. Of course, there's no reason to run away. I just wanted a divorce and to live separately. He wasn't a bad dad, and I didn't intend to keep him from you. But Dad said
I either had to keep smiling or he'd take you away from me forever. He said I'd never see you again. I agreed to stay with him for your sake, just to be with you. I can't deny that I started looking for a way out. Then I found out that he wanted to put me in a special hospital where I could never get out and never see you again. I met a kind man who helped us escape. Ryan, I beg you, if something happens to me and Dad asks about him, don't say anything about that uncle in the woods that took us to the bus station. Don't tell him, I implore you. It would bring trouble to that man. Your father would seek revenge.
Eleanor struggled to explain in a way a little boy could understand.
That's why I decided to run away with you. I didn't want to, but I couldn't bear to leave you. Son, please forgive me. I love you so much.
Eleanor choked on her tears, unable to hold them back any longer. The boy was crying too, clinging to his mother even more tightly. He seemed to feel her pain with every fibre of his being.
That jerk!
Mr. Warren, who had been listening intently to Eleanor's confession, muttered under his breath. The woman wasn't sure if it referred to her story or Mario's actions on the road. He was desperately chasing the fleeing car. Mr. Warren made a sharp turn and accelerated even more. Suddenly, Eleanor heard a loud, horrifying sound of shattering glass and metal scraped. She closed her eyes in terror, thinking they had crashed into something, that the poor old car couldn't withstand such a hellish chase. But no, their vehicle slowed down smoothly. "Stay here," Mr. Warren commanded, and got out of the car. Eleanor turned to the rear window and froze in horror. Her husband's car had turned into a pile of scrap metal. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Mr. Warren stop and stand still. Suddenly, there was an explosion. Even if Mario had been alive before, it was impossible to save him now. Eleanor stared at this nightmarish scene. Despite her sense of liberation, she felt the deepest grief. She couldn't bring herself to feel joy. She still felt sorry for the man she had lived with for so long, despite the pain he had caused her. Now, more than 6 months had passed. Due to the gruesome scene of his father's death, Ryan had to see a psychologist to ensure it wouldn't leave a permanent scar on his soul. Otherwise, Eleanor and her son's lives hadn't changed much. They inherited Mario's estate, but Eleanor immediately wanted to sell the business and the rest of her spouse's ventures and the house he had been living in recently with Sharon. She wanted nothing more to do with it. Eleanor was now an extremely wealthy widow, but her and her son's daily routines remained largely unchanged. They still lived in the apartment where they had fled to. Their faithful friend Jessica, her daughter Holly, and of course Mr. Warren lived near them. Peter, who had helped Eleanor and her son so much, remained a family friend. He visited them often, and it seemed he and Jessica were developing a relationship. God grant them happiness. They had waited so long for it, and deserved it fully. Unlike her late husband, who had withered over his wealth and become morally corrupt before her eyes, Eleanor wanted to set a worthy example for her son. She returned to medical school and, despite her age, was going to become a doctor. She seemed perfectly happy now. She had her son, a career she loved, dear friends and security, everything she had dreamed of, and even things she hadn't dared to imagine. The first ray of sunlight slipped through the loose curtain and tickled Tammy's nose. She squeezed her eyes shut in her sleep, stretched and sneezed. Opening her eyes with a sweet yawn, she patted the space next to her. Garrett was already gone. Again, he left me at the crack of dawn without waking me. Lately, Garrett had been working a lot. He was back in the office, preparing major projects, practically disappearing there 24 hours a day. He came home late, slept briefly, and returned to his beloved work. Tammy pulled on a robe and went into the kitchen. She had prepared her husband's breakfast the night before, but the stuffed pancakes remained untouched. Again, he only drank coffee. Oh, Garrett. Tammy sighed. "You're working too hard. Poor thing." She had tried to get up early to see her husband off to work, but this morning she had overslept, and he, apparently, hadn't woken her. "At least I made breakfast last night." "But what for? He didn't even taste it." "Well, at least I will make sure Rosalie eats breakfast." Tammy peeked into the nursery. 10-year-old Rosalie was asleep, cuddled up with a teddy bear. The woman smiled. What a sweet sleeper. It's almost a shame to wake her up. Let her sleep a little longer. Tammy returned to the kitchen, put the pancakes in the microwave, poured milk into a pot, and turned on the gas. She pondered for a moment how many years her mornings had started the same way. Her husband rushing to work, her daughter getting ready for kindergarten, now for school. And the kitchen, always the kitchen. Yes, she was a housewife now, but 12 years ago everything was different. She had envisioned a different future. The milk in the saucepan sizzled, and a puffy cap rushed up. Tammy snapped back to reality, shaking her head. Enough of these memories. It's time to make cocoa. A few minutes later, the aroma of chocolate wafted through the kitchen. The pancakes had long since heated up, so breakfast was ready. Tammy anxiously glanced at the clock. It was already time to wake up Rosalie. "Daughter, get up," she called into the nursery. "Breakfast is on the table." "Mummy?" Rosalie mumbled sleepily, clutching her toy tighter. 5 more minutes." 1 minute, Tammy replied firmly. "Come on, open your eyes and head to the bathroom." The daughter sighed heavily and sat up in bed. "Mum, I had such a dream," she said, yawning. "We had moved out of town. We had this huge, beautiful summer house like a palace, and I was walking there. I don't remember anything else. You woke me up." "I'm sorry, my dear," Tammy smiled. "You'll continue it next time." "Yeah, right," Rosalie grumbled and slipped into the bathroom barefoot. With homework, school, and music lessons, no time to live. Not in my dreams, not in real life. "Your slippers are in the bathroom," Tammy laughed in response. An hour later, she saw her daughter off to school. Thankfully, it was just across the street. After kissing Rosalie goodbye, Tammy decided to walk around the city with her camera. Today, she was heading to the park. It was spring, the time when all living things remember to blossom and perfume the air, delighting the world with rich colours. The apple trees in the park were dazzlingly beautiful in their snow-white garb, and the sprawling lilacs caught the eye with their flowery outfits. Tammy loved taking pictures of nature and people. How she cherished this activity. At some point, she decided to take a break and enjoyed the surroundings. She sat on a bench and closed her eyes. Nearby, birds were trilling in the bushes. "Mom, are you a photographer?" a thin voice asked. Tammy opened her eyes in surprise to see a boy of about 5 standing next to the bench. "No, kid, I'm just taking pictures for fun," she replied. "Why?" The boy raised his eyebrows in surprise. "What do you use the pictures for?" "Just for enjoyment." The child nodded understandingly. What a sweet little boy, Tammy thought to herself. "Would you like me to take a picture of you?" she suggested. "Who are you here with?" "I'm alone," the boy replied. "What do you mean, alone? Why? Where's your mum?" "Mummy? Mummy's in heaven, and Daddy's working. I'm with Grandma now. She sent me to the store to get bread." "And you go alone?" "What's the big deal?" The boy shrugged his shoulders. "Oh, I've been talking too long." He waved his arms comically and ran to the nearby grocery store. Tammy watched him go. What a pity, such a little boy, and already without a mother. So independent, but it's not right that he's running around alone. She decided she would wait for him to return, suddenly feeling the urge to help this unusual child. Watching the store entrance, Tammy took a few more pictures. Soon the boy emerged with a loaf and practically hopped along the path. His wavy blonde hair fluttered lightly in the warm breeze. He smiled so carefree, jumping up and down, clutching the loaf to his chest, that Tammy couldn't resist capturing the moment. What a great shot. "Mum, did you take my picture?" the boy asked, running up to Tammy. Yes, she nodded and showed him the image on the display. Do you like it? It's okay. He nodded a little reservedly and looked at her shyly. Can you make me a card? I can, Tammy smiled. Next time we meet, I'll give you a picture. Now, let me walk you home. My name's Tammy. And mine is Eric, he smiled back. I live in that house over there. He pointed with his pen to an old 5-story building, its roof visible from the edge of the park. And I live in that house over there. Tammy pointed to their new building. You live in a nice house, Eric said. I haven't seen you here before. My dad and I recently moved in with my grandmother. He's at work all the time now, and I'm with my grandmother, since there's no room at the daycare centre. Chatting, they reached the 5-story building. Tammy promised to return in a couple of days with a picture for the boy. He promised to be there. Returning home, Tammy reflected on life's unfairness. Here was a good, wonderful boy, with an apparently difficult life. His mother gone, his father always working, his grandmother likely ill. She remembered her own story. Tammy, too, grew up with her grandmother after her parents died in an accident. Grandma Ingrid did everything to ensure her granddaughter grew up to be a decent person. She insisted Tammy attend art school after regular classes, recognizing her talent for drawing. However, after graduating, Tammy became more interested in photography. Soon a fashion magazine noticed her work and offered her a job. Thus, she became a photojournalist. One day she was assigned to photograph a young, successful businessman. After a successful photo shoot, he surprisingly invited her on a romantic date, which Tammy accepted. So began her romance with Garrett. The girl was overjoyed. He was rich, handsome and caring. When Garrett proposed, Tammy didn't hesitate for a second. However, Grandma Ingrid didn't share her granddaughter's enthusiasm. Oh, Tammy, this Garrett seems slippery, the old lady said. Maybe there's no need to rush. Get to know each other a bit more. Grandma, Tammy laughed. Garrett isn't slippery. He's the best in the world. Oh, I don't know, sighed Grandma Ingrid. A month before the wedding, Grandma Ingrid passed away. Tammy, deeply upset, wanted to cancel the wedding, but Garrett insisted on proceeding. Guests were invited, the restaurant paid for. Though sad about Grandma Ingrid, Tammy reasoned that she was over 70 and listened to her future husband, as she would continue to do. At first, Garrett insisted Tammy stop communicating with her school friends. This wasn't difficult, as they only spoke once a year anyway. Then he demanded she quit her job. Though reluctant, Tammy was 3 months pregnant and didn't think long about it. She wanted to care for the house and her husband. When Rosalie was born, thoughts of work faded entirely. For years, Tammy's life narrowed to the confines of their apartment, a nice 2-level home with excellent renovations and good furniture. What else did she need? She had everything. A child, a husband, wealth. Garrett earned well as the director of a trading firm. But as time passed, Tammy felt stifled, yearning to escape her golden cage, if only for a few hours. She even dreamed of returning to the magazine, but when Garrett learned of her aspirations, he objected. My wife will stay at home, he declared. Why should you bother? Don't you have enough money? Enough, Tammy thought indignantly, but I want to pursue my profession. All I do is cook, clean and shop. And what about Rosalie? If you work, the child will be left alone all day. Tammy, that's reckless. A woman is first and foremost a mother and wife. No, I'm against you working. Realizing she couldn't change her husband's mind, Tammy tried to forget her dreams. But occasionally she ventured out with her camera, just for herself, like the time she met the precocious Eric. 2 days later, as promised, she returned to the park with photos for the boy. He arrived promptly, grinning from ear to ear. Tammy, you came, he shouted joyfully, running up. Of course I did, I promised. Tammy replied, handing him the pictures. Oh, how nice they are, the boy admired. Tammy, you're a professional. A professional. Tammy smiled sadly. Are you shopping again today? No, I'm going to the pharmacy, the boy sighed. Grandma's sick. I need to buy some medicine. Will they sell it to you? I don't know. The boy hesitated, looking uncertainly at Tammy. Let me help you, she offered. What medicine do you need? The boy timidly held out a list of medicines and money. Put that away, Tammy said, pointing to the money. But why? These medicines cost very little, Tammy reassured him. Of course it wasn't entirely true, but she wanted to support the boy. It was clear that he, his grandmother, and father lived simply, if not poorly. The boy wore old clothes, though they were clean. She walked him home again from the pharmacy. The next day, as Tammy was returning home with Rosalie, she encountered Eric and a tall, scowling man in the park. He appeared to be in his 40s, tired, with slightly silvered temples. Life had clearly not been kind to him. Papa! Eric shrieked when he saw Tammy. That's that Mum! The boy rushed to meet her, but the man stopped, grabbing his arm. So, it was you who took pictures of my son and bought his grandmother's medicine, right? He asked in a muffled voice. Yes, Tammy stammered, disconcerted. Let me ask you, what do you want with my child? You have a daughter, I see. We're just friends, and I wanted to do something nice for him. I'll ask you not to do anything like that again, the man muttered as he walked away, holding Eric's hand. He looked back guiltily at Tammy, and he was clearly on the verge of tears, but the woman couldn't calm him down. His father was too disgruntled. Really? Why does she need this boy? His father is right. She is a stranger to him. Mum, who is that? Rosalie asked, surprised. Just a boy, Tammy replied with a sigh. Let's go home. I made your favourite berry pie today. At home, watching her daughter devour another piece of pie with pleasure, Tammy finally calmed down. That's it. We must forget this story. This is why you shouldn't do good deeds for people. But Tammy was afraid to admit to herself why she was suddenly drawn to this blonde-haired Eric. He reminded her of someone, but there was something else. 5 years ago, she had lost a child in childbirth. It was her second pregnancy with Garrett, and everything seemed fine, but something went wrong at the hospital. The baby was born fragile. Doctors said it was due to birth trauma, and if he survived, he would be mentally impaired. They suggested giving him up. Tammy was against it, but Garrett convinced her otherwise. Tammy will torture ourselves and him. Let's give him up. We'll have a normal child later. And this one? He's not likely to survive anyway. Hearing these words, Tammy had a hysterical episode. They barely calmed her down, and in the morning, they told her the baby hadn't survived. Tammy collapsed from worry. She spent another month in the hospital and never saw the baby. Garrett buried Bobby, as Tammy had named him. Now Tammy visited his grave every year. God didn't send any more children to her and Garrett, so there was only Rosalie. Yes, seeing Eric, Tammy involuntarily reached out to him like a son. That evening, she told her husband about the boy and his father. Garrett listened, frowning. I'll never understand your desire to be good to everyone. That's why you need this kid? You have a daughter at home, household, and you're wandering around parks, he muttered. Garrett, I go to the parks, as you put it, because my soul yearns for it. My hands itch for the camera. They'd be better off reaching for the vacuum cleaner or the oven. Are you saying I'm a bad homemaker? Tammy was indignant. I'm not saying anything of the sort. It's just that your place is at home, not running around with a camera through the bushes like a girl. Garrett, I just wanted to share this with you. That man got angry at me for no reason. He hasn't scolded you enough. That night they had a big fight. Tammy shouted that Garrett, in the end, didn't see her as a person, just a housewife. Garrett, not one to mince words, retorted, Since you married a serious man, stop hanging around the city. In the end, Garrett left, slamming the door. Rosalie, who had heard everything, came out of her room and went to her mother, hugging her and wiping away her rare tears. "Mummy, don't cry," whispered the daughter. "You're the best, and you take pictures better than anyone else. By the way, our class teacher said we need a photographer for graduation. Can you do it?" "Yes, of course." Tammy smiled, pulling herself together. "She already called me. You'll have a great photo shoot." Tammy was already asleep when Garrett returned. Their daughter too. He looked into the bedroom and nursery, then quietly headed for the living room. Taking the phone, he called someone and talked for a while. Afterward, he sat by the open window, smoking. He was deep in thought about something that tormented him. In the morning, Garrett left early as usual. Tammy, having seen her daughter off to school, returned home. In the living room, she saw the phone on the sofa. Garrett forgot it. How could he manage without his phone? Tammy decided to take it to his office. On the way, she couldn't resist peeking through the messages in her husband's contacts. Nothing interesting, as expected. But then she read a strange message. "Tomorrow I'm waiting for you at the cafe, by the tower, at 10 p.m. The message had come at night from an unknown number. Who scheduled an appointment with Garrett? Was it work? It didn't seem like it. It's too late. Tammy decided that Garrett would tell her everything himself. Garrett's secretary, seeing Tammy, smiled and offered to make tea. "He has a representative of our competitors currently," she whispered. "They're looking for common ground, so to speak." "Okay, I'll wait." Tammy nodded. The wait lasted about an hour. At first, silence reigned in the office. Then raised voices could be heard. Evidently, the diplomatic conversation had failed, as the competitors left, slamming the door. Tammy entered the office to find her husband irritated and flushed. "What are you doing here?" he asked, eyebrows raised in surprise. "You forgot your cell phone," Tammy said softly. "I thought you might need it during the day." "Everything's upside down today. I didn't even notice I'd left my phone at home." "Are you going to be home early? I wanted to make something special." "No, I'm sorry, I've got a lot to do." "You're not going to work until night, are you?" Garrett simply lowered his eyes and shook his head without answering. Doubt crept into Tammy's heart. Was her husband cheating? She couldn't stop thinking about that text message. Suddenly everything seemed to fall into place. Somehow, her husband's late returns home became the norm. He leaves early, he's irritable, clearly hiding something from me. He definitely has a mistress. She thought and decided to follow her husband. That evening, she went to the cafe mentioned in the message. She found a table away from the entrance, hidden behind a large aquarium that shielded her from view while giving her a clear line of sight. Perfect. Tammy was waiting. For some reason, she knew immediately when the other woman arrived. A tall, slender brunette who entered the cafe looked around disdainfully and sat at a window table. Soon after, Garrett arrived and headed straight for the brunette. Tammy's impulse was to jump up, confront them, slap her husband, and claw at this insolent girl's hair. But she restrained herself. Garrett smiled at the brunette and sat beside her. Tammy couldn't hear their conversation. She could only see Garrett's back and the woman's sweet smile. Tammy's heart pounded, and tears welled in her eyes. I wonder what he'd say if I went over there now. But Tammy's legs felt like cotton. She had no strength to stand. She decided to call him. The phone rang, but Garrett rejected the call, engrossed in conversation with the brunette. Tammy dialed again. "Yes, dear, did you want something?" he asked, slightly annoyed. "Hi, Garrett," Tammy said as quietly as possible. "Where are you now?" "Tammy, I'm in a meeting. It's not a good time to talk. I'll be home late." He hung up. He'll be late. At a meeting? What a liar. She thought, and cried. For years, Tammy had been sure Garrett loved her. They'd been through so much together, and now he dared to act like this. For what? Because I gave him the best years of my life? Because I slave away at home all day, not hiring help, even though we can afford it? Why did I give up my dream and quit my job at the magazine? Tammy pondered what to do next. Then the brunette stood and headed for the exit. Garrett following. Through the window, Tammy watched her husband open his car door for this woman. She smiled at him. He smiled back, saying something. "Traitor," Tammy whispered, wiping tears from her face. "You'll regret this." A thirst for vengeance gripped her heart. She didn't know how yet, but she was determined to make her husband pay for this betrayal. Should I confront him now? What did I actually see? Just my husband sitting with another woman in a cafe. He'll easily justify himself. He'll claim it was a business meeting. Never mind that it's 11 at night. He'll deny that they were smiling at each other. He'll make it sound believable. Tammy had no doubt about that now. A storm raged in her soul. So while I cook his meals and iron his shirts, he's out having fun with other women, telling me to stay at home. He's made himself quite comfortable. Tammy decided to catch him red-handed and then confront him with all her accusations. She ran out of the cafe and hailed a cab. "Follow that black Audi," she commanded the driver of the old car. The older man nodded. "Are we following someone or catching up?" "Following, I think." "Husband?" "Yes." The driver shook his head and smoothly merged into the right lane. Surprisingly, the old car kept up easily, and Garrett's car remained in sight. Tammy couldn't understand where her husband was going. There were no hotels in this area. Is he really going to that girl's home? He's got some nerve. Soon Garrett's car turned into an alley and stopped at the maternity hospital. Tammy's heart clenched. This was where she had given birth to her Bobby. The girl got out of the car, waved to Garrett, and lightly ran up the steps of the building. "So she works here?" Tammy muttered. "Let's get out of here. Please, can you take a roundabout way so I can be home before my husband?" The old driver nodded understandingly. Tammy had already changed into her home clothes when she heard the door lock click. As if nothing had happened, Garrett stepped into the house. "Hello, dear," he smiled. "I'm so tired today. Such a hard day. Will you feed me?" "Eat whatever you find in the refrigerator," Tammy said indifferently, and went to her daughter's room. She decided to sleep with her. She couldn't bear to look at Garrett. Garrett watched her go with a surprised look, but didn't say a word. In the morning, Tammy purposefully stayed in bed until he left for work. Then she got up and woke her daughter. "Rise and shine, sleepyhead," she said with a smile. "Only 1 week of school left." "That's right," Rosalie smiled, stretching. "How great. Dad will take a vacation. Where will we go this year? Dad's been quiet about it. I don't want to go to the sea. Maybe the mountains?" "Maybe the mountains," Tammy replied absent-mindedly. "Now let's get ready for school. We need to find out everything about the photo shoot today." Afterward, there was a flurry of activity because of the daughter's celebration. Garrett was still at work until late. Tammy remained silent, pondering the situation. She decided not to make a fuss, but seeing Garrett was difficult for her, especially imagining him with someone else. Naturally, Garrett missed the 4th grade graduation, citing his workload. Rosalie pouted a little, but her mum arranged such a wonderful photo shoot, and the other parents contributed so much to the celebration that the girl forgot about her dad's absence. "The important thing is that you were here," Rosalie said when they returned home. "Mummy, you're wonderful." "Thank you, sweetie," Tammy smiled, but it quickly faded as she saw the brunette leaving their building. Was she really in our apartment? If Garrett is home, she must be. Sure enough, Garrett opened the door for them, wearing his robe after a shower. "Hello, my girls," he smiled. "I had an accident today." "An accident?" Rosalie was horrified. "Not a car accident. At work, the secretary spilled coffee on me, twisted her ankle, and the cup fell right on my white shirt. I'm not sure if it can be washed or not." "Just throw it away," Tammy replied indifferently, her mind on the brunette. "How long have you been home?" "About 10 minutes. I thought I'd take a quick shower, given the circumstances." "I see." Tammy smirked and said nothing, but took the ruined shirt and tossed it in the trash can in front of her surprised husband. "Couldn't you at least try to wash it?" It's a good shirt, Garrett said, confused. But Tammy seemed not to hear him. She kept thinking about the brunette. Garrett's home naked, entertaining a mistress. Well then, I'll start a hunt. A photo hunt. It's convenient today, since Rosalie is going to her friends for a few hours, and the grown-ups will look after her. In short, after dropping her daughter off at a friend's house, Tammy went to her husband's office, having hired another cab driver. The rest of the day passed without incident. Garrett didn't leave the office, but at 7 o'clock he came out and drove to the same cafe. Tammy managed to photograph her husband with the brunette. They met. The girl kissed Garrett on the cheek. They sat at the table. This time, Tammy clearly saw their relationship was far from professional. But who was she? Not knowing her, Tammy decided to go to the maternity hospital, where Garrett had first driven the girl. The next day, she was in the head doctor's office. "What did you want from our Marla?" the head doctor asked, looking at a picture of the woman with her hand on Garrett's shoulder. "I want her to stay away from the man sitting next to her," Tammy replied. "He's my husband. I love him, but I can see he's infatuated with Marla." "Have you talked to your husband?" "No. I'm struggling. I don't know where to start. I don't want to lose him, but I can't bear this situation any longer. I thought you, as her employer, could influence your employee." "I'll try." The doctor nodded and looked carefully at Tammy, then at the photograph again. "Listen, I think I've seen you before. You and your spouse." "Yes, I'm Tammy Klingler. 5 years ago my baby died in your clinic. I would never come here. But your employee is being more than provocative." "Klingler?" The doctor's face changed as he remembered. Yes, I recall. It's a pity it happened like that. Don't worry about Marla. She's a good paediatric nurse, but she's quite the flirt. If she's having an affair with your husband, I'll put her in her place quickly." "I doubt it," Tammy smirked, "but at least try." Tammy left the clinic and froze on the building's porch, her heart pounding. Yes, 5 years ago, she had felt terrible here, and now her emotions were no better. Is that why I came here in the first place? To hope that this brazen nurse can somehow be stopped? And Garrett, how do I keep living with him? Tammy rounded the corner and sat on a bench next to the building. She closed her eyes. Then she heard a woman's voice from a nearby open window. "Hello, Garrett," Tammy heard. "It's me. Listen, your wife came here. Turns out she thinks we're having an affair." Tammy cautiously peered through the window and saw Marla. She was standing half-turned, looking at herself in the mirror while talking on the phone. "All these years, I wouldn't mind hooking up with you, but you're resisting for some reason." "Why? Oh, stop yelling, Garrett. Don't get so worked up." Hearing this, Tammy recoiled and pressed herself against the wall. So Garrett's not cheating on me, and I was making it up. Tammy felt relieved, but what she heard next froze her in place. "Garrett, the head doctor recognized your wife and yelled at me. For what? For communicating with you? What if she figures it out? She thinks your son is dead. What if, purely hypothetically, she gets an idea?" Garrett shouted something into the receiver. Marla made excuses, but Tammy wasn't listening anymore. Everything suddenly blurred before her eyes. She didn't know how long she sat there until someone touched her shoulder. Tammy looked up to see an elderly woman in a white coat standing next to her. She looked like a nurse. "Honey, are you feeling ill?" the elderly woman asked kindly. "Should I call a doctor?" "No, thank you. That won't be necessary." Tammy shook her head. "A doctor can't help me." "What's troubling you?" "I just realized the man I loved has betrayed me." "Did your husband cheat on you?" "Don't worry, he'll come back. They're all like that. Once he sobers up, he'll return to his wife and kids." If only that were the main problem. Tammy looked at the elderly woman's kind face. A thought struck her. "Excuse me, but have you been working at this maternity hospital for long?" "Yes, for half of my work life." "I can see you're a good person. There's something I need to know. It's a long story, but could you please spare me half an hour? My name is Tammy. And you are? Mrs. Mahon, I've just finished my shift. I could give you some time. Soon they left the hospital grounds together. Tammy suggested sitting in a cafe, where she recounted everything she'd overheard through the open window. You say your last name is Klingler, Mrs. Mahon repeated, as if trying to remember. You were here 5 years ago? I recall a woman with such a last name. Yes, it was a complicated case. All the doctors were anxious. It was their fault. The baby had a problem. The woman had to have a caesarean section. They made her deliver naturally. There was something wrong with the baby, but he was alive, that's for sure. And also, I heard the doctor say the baby should be transferred to an orphanage because the parents refused to take him. I wonder why they refused. The baby looked pretty normal. Are you certain there were no fatalities, Mrs. Mahon? Are you sure you're not confusing this with another case? I'm not confusing anything. For the past 5 years, everyone at our maternity hospital has survived. There were weak babies and mothers with complications, but everyone survived. So my Bobby is alive. And Marla was talking about my baby. She's involved in this. And the head doctor. And Garrett. Oh my God. Garrett has been hiding the truth from me all these years. And he's been talking to this Marla. Oh, that Marla. She's trouble. As for the baby, Tammy, I'll find out more, I promise. Don't tell your husband anything yet. My daughter has been working in an orphanage for a long time. Maybe she can tell me something about your baby. I don't know anything about him, Tammy sobbed. I just named him Bobby. I don't even know his blood type. But you remember his birth date, don't you? Of course. It was September the 5th. All right. September the 5th, 5 years ago. I'll check with my daughter. They exchanged phone numbers and said goodbye. Tammy walked home, her legs heavy. She dreaded seeing her husband. She had so much to say, so much to ask, but Tammy feared hearing the whole truth. Worst of all, she had no one to confide in. Garrett had driven away all her friends, and she had no close people except for her daughter. The thought of Rosalie gave her some strength. Mummy, Rosalie ran into the hallway to greet her. Where have you been? I missed you so much. Yes, where have you been? Garrett called out irritably from the other room. I came home to find our daughter alone, with nothing but sandwiches to eat. Tammy didn't answer her husband or even look at him. Lost in thought, she hugged her daughter and kissed her. Are you hungry, honey? A little, Rosalie admitted. But I had tea with Dad, so don't worry. I've just come back from visiting Polly. Her mum saw me home. You're my clever girl. I'll cook something. Tammy went to the kitchen without glancing at her husband. Tammy, what's going on? Garrett followed her. Why aren't you talking to me? Where have you been all day? Do you really want to know? Tammy looked at her husband vacantly. Yes. He met her gaze. I don't understand your tone. Tammy wanted to voice all her suspicions, but restrained herself at the last moment. It wasn't time yet. Garrett, I think you're cheating on me, she blurted out suddenly. Me? Garrett choked, then laughed. Tammy, what are you on about? Have you been watching too many soap operas? I work my fingers to the bone, so you and Rosalie can have the best. When would I have time to cheat on you? Then who is Marla? Garrett's face changed for a second. Then he gave a surprised look, as if remembering. Marla? The brunette who works as a nurse. Oh, Marla. That's my classmate. Why are you asking about her? I saw you together yesterday at the cafe. Garrett's cheekbones reddened, and he became visibly nervous. But after a second he pulled himself together. Yeah, she scheduled an appointment with me yesterday. Our class is planning to get together this summer, so she called me to discuss the details. Where we're going to celebrate, how, and so on. Garrett was lying on the fly, and Tammy realized it, but she pretended to believe him. You're not lying to me, are you? Oh, come on, love, Garrett smiled. I have only you in my heart. He put his arms around his wife and kissed her. Tammy wanted to push him away, to shout at him, to ask where their son was. But she restrained herself with the last of her strength, and just put her head on his shoulder, kept silent for a while, and then pulled away and went about preparing dinner. "Tammy, is the incident over?" Garrett asked cheerfully. "Yes, dear." Tammy even smiled back at him, though her soul was in turmoil, and she was thinking about one thing, whether Mrs. Mahon would find out anything or not. That night Tammy had a dream. She was walking through the forest when suddenly a wolf stepped towards her from the bushes. Tammy froze for a moment and looked into the eyes of the beast. Then suddenly she heard a child crying. Tammy shuddered and the beast perked up. The wolf rushed to the place where the child's crying was heard. Tammy ran after him. In the clearing sat a little boy, smearing tears on his grimy cheeks. He looked around helplessly. "Mummy!" he suddenly shouted when he saw Tammy, got up and ran to her. But the wolf was ahead. The beast grabbed the child by the shirt and pulled him away. "No, no!" screamed Tammy. "Don't touch him! Let him go!" She ran after the wolf, screaming, crying. For a second, the wolf stopped, looked at her, and then Tammy realized that it was not a wolf, but Garrett. A second more, and they, together with the child, dispersed like a fog. "Give him back! Give him back!" Tammy repeated, shaking. She was awakened by Garrett shaking her shoulder. "Tammy, Tammy, what's wrong with you?" Garrett leaned over his wife. "Wake up!" She opened her eyes. Her head ached. Her heart was pounding frantically. Sticky sweat beaded on her forehead, and her teeth ached from clenching her jaws hard. "Was it a nightmare?" Garrett looked into her eyes. "You were screaming terribly." "Yeah, a scary dream," she said, exhaling. "You were calling for someone. I didn't understand. I was dreaming about our son." "Tammy, honey, it's been so long. Calm down, calm down. It's all gone. It's just a dream." Garrett held her against him, cradling her like a child. Tammy quieted down, calming a little. Or maybe it was really all she had imagined. All that she had learned the day before, just a coincidence. But she had heard Garrett and Marla talking. Tammy pulled away from Garrett. "It's okay, I'll go back to sleep." She covered herself with a blanket and turned away from her husband. Soon he lay down next to her, hugging her. Tammy wanted to throw off his hateful hand, but she did not even move. Let him sleep. She herself lay there until morning without sleep and without thoughts. Her head was as if empty. In the morning, Garrett kissed her and went to work. Rosalie slept in the nursery and Tammy dozed off. She was awakened by a phone call. Mrs. Mahon called. "Tammy, I found out something, but it's not a phone conversation. Come to my place at 1 o'clock, just as my daughter is coming over. She has something to tell you." Tammy immediately jumped out of bed and frantically began to pack. Then she sat down and calmed down a little. There was still time. She went to the kitchen and prepared lunch. "Mummy, what smells so good?" her daughter asked, rubbing her eyes. "I made your favourite red soup. Let's wash up, eat, and then we'll go out." "Where to?" wondered the girl. "To a very nice grandmother. I met her recently. You'll sit quietly at her place, and I'll talk to her daughter." Soon Tammy called a cab, and at the appointed time went to Mrs. Mahon. The woman lived in the suburb in a small but neat house. Now it was covered with blossoming apple trees, lilacs and cherry blossoms. Mrs. Mahon came out onto the porch to greet her guests. "What a grown-up daughter you have," Mrs. Mahon beamed. "Well, young lady, would you like to come in with me to the vegetable garden? Your mum needs to speak with my daughter, and will only disturb them. I just need to water the tomatoes and cabbage." "Tomatoes?" Rosalie asked, surprised. "Are they already red?" "No, sweetie, they're just little sprouts now, but in time they'll bear fruit," Mrs. Mahon explained. She took the girl by the hand, and they headed to the plants while Tammy entered the house. A woman in her 40s peered out from the tiny kitchen. She was slightly overweight, with her hair tied in a bun and wearing glasses. Tammy was taken aback. What a stern daughter Mrs. Mahon has, she thought. "Hello," the woman nodded. "I'm Kathleen. My mother told me your story. To be honest, I shouldn't disclose such things, but this is a special case." Kathleen invited Tammy to the table, poured tea, and began her story. 5 years ago, she was appointed director of the orphanage. A boy had arrived with a grim diagnosis. Doctors believed his brain was damaged due to a difficult birth. They considered transferring him to a specialised institution, but for some reason it kept being postponed. And as time passed, it became clear the baby was perfectly healthy, developing like any other child. Soon after, Gloria came to work at the orphanage. In her early 30s, she immediately bonded with the abandoned child and soon set out to adopt him. She and her husband couldn't have children of their own. They'd undergone lengthy treatment, but the issue was with her husband. Without money for IVF, they decided to adopt. Eventually, they managed to take the baby home. I don't know if it's your boy or not, but the birth centre and date of birth match. Kathleen continued. She paused for a moment, then gathered her courage. I shouldn't be telling you this, but Gloria passed away recently. Cancer took her in just months. Her husband Marcus and the boy were left alone. I know they've moved in with Marcus's mother. Everything would be fine, but Marcus started drinking heavily. His mother is ill, and the boy is left on his own. Tammy cried out, suddenly struck by a hunch. What's the boy's name? At the orphanage, they called him Eric. Eric! Tammy exclaimed. Could it really be him? I don't understand, Kathleen said, puzzled. Tammy confusedly told her about meeting the boy she'd photographed. She took out her camera, which she carried everywhere out of habit, and found the right photo. Here, is this him? Tammy pointed at the image on the camera screen. I remember him as very small, Kathleen admitted, but he looks just like him. He's the same bright child. Yes, very similar. Kathleen hesitated. She wanted to add that the boy looked like Tammy too, but stopped herself. What if it was all a mistake? Mum, it turns out that tomatoes are so tiny at first. An enthusiastic Rosalie appeared in the doorway. I was watering them. Mrs. Mahon said I could come and help her water them again. We'll come back, won't we? Yes, of course, Tammy replied, still shaken from her conversation with Kathleen. She looked at Mrs. Mahon. Thank you, I just can't understand one thing. Why didn't you let me know at all? But you suddenly volunteered to help me. Why? It's an old score with the head doctor, Mrs. Mahon smiled sadly. I worked in that hospital all my life as a midwife. Before I retired, I was accused of negligence. They claimed a woman got serious health problems because of me. I was suspended from work and denied the benefits that medical staff are entitled to, but I wasn't to blame for that situation. The head doctor was operating on the woman and it went poorly. Nobody would listen to me. So if your story is true, that chief doctor will be ousted from his position. I see, Tammy replied. You can be sure that if my son is alive, there will be consequences for all those responsible in this story, both the head doctor and my husband. Rosalie listened attentively to the adults but understood nothing. Mum, what son were you talking about? The girl asked when they were driving home. Sweetie, Tammy said, coming to her senses, I'll tell you everything, but a little later. Just don't say anything to Daddy yet about our visit, and don't mention anything you heard there, okay? Okay, the girl nodded. Tammy realised she had made a mistake by discussing such matters in front of her daughter, but there was no going back. Later that day, she persuaded Rosalie to walk a little more in the park. Her daughter agreed. Tammy hoped she would see Eric today, and as if answering her prayers, there he was, running and jumping as usual. Tammy, he shouted joyfully, smiling. Where have you been? Were you scared of my daddy that time? He's good, he just acts tough. Do you know what he did with the picture you gave me? What? Tammy asked, tense inside. He framed it and hung it on the wall in the hallway. Grandma really liked the picture too. She said the photographer has a real talent. Thank you, Tammy laughed. And this is my daughter, Rosalie. The girl nodded to the boy, looking at her mum, confused. Rosalie, this is Eric, a good friend of mine. The good friend was sniffing endlessly. Do you have a cold, Eric? Tammy asked, concerned. It's summer. How did you catch a cold? I ate a lot of ice cream. Daddy got a new job, so we have money now. The boy smiled happily. He bought me new jeans. Tammy noticed that the boy's shirt was new too. Yes, the kid had dressed up. "You look great," Tammy smiled and took out disposable handkerchiefs from her purse. "Let me wipe your nose." She immediately and deftly did so. The three of them walked around a bit more. Tammy ran to the pharmacy and bought Eric some vitamins. Afterward, they walked to the boy home. "Good kid," smiled Rosalie. Tammy nodded thoughtfully. "Rosalie, will you stay home alone for an hour? I still have to go on an errand. I'll be quick." "Okay, Mum." Tammy took her daughter home, then rushed to the private clinic where genetic analysis was done. The handkerchief she used to wipe Eric's nose was suitable for the examination. When Tammy returned home, she was met by a furious Garrett. "Where did you disappear to again?" he shouted. "The daughter is alone again. Tammy, what are you doing? Where did you take my daughter during the day?" "Mum, I blabbed," Rosalie whispered innocently. "It's all right, sweetheart." Tammy smiled encouragingly at her and looked at her husband. "Garrett, I had some errands. I went to see some good acquaintances." "What kind of acquaintances can you have that I don't know about? And what is this? You have a family, a husband and a child. You should be taking care of the house. And yet, dinner isn't cooked. The house is a mess." "The house is in order," Tammy said calmly. "And the food is in the fridge. I'll heat it up." She went to the kitchen, but Garrett grabbed her arm. "What child are you looking for?" Rosalie mentioned something. "Tammy, are you losing your mind?" "I'm more sane than ever." Pulling her hand away, Tammy replied, "And since you're asking, I'll tell you. Yes, I'm looking for my son." "But he's gone, Tammy. Come to your senses." "No, you definitely need a doctor. We'll go to the doctor tomorrow." "And you'll give him money to declare me incompetent, is that it?" "Money? How much did you pay the head doctor of the maternity ward to put our son in an orphanage?" Garrett shook when he heard that. Then he began to insist that Tammy had made everything up, that everything was as it had been, that the child didn't survive. But Tammy didn't listen to him, as she had no intention of proving anything. She had other thoughts in her head. It had been 10 days of waiting. During that time, she didn't talk to her husband. She walked with her daughter in the park, where they met Eric and had fun together. Eric told her about his family. His father worked all day at some computer firm. Yes, his name was Marcus. Tammy's heart twitched with excitement. So many coincidences. And Eric's grandmother seldom walked, only around the apartment a little. His mother's name was Gloria. Her life had been taken by a serious illness. Eric told her a lot about his life as they sat in cafes and walked around the city, while Tammy waited. Finally, she received a call from the clinic, informing her that there was a result. Tammy drove to the clinic with a sinking heart. What would they tell her? "I don't understand anything," she said excitedly to the lab technician who brought her the documents. Tammy read the numbers but couldn't believe it. "The results indicate that you and the person whose biomaterial was provided are close relatives." "How close?" "Like mother and son, for example." When Tammy heard that, she cried out, and then she wept. "Yes, Eric is her son. It's her Bobby, whom she's been mourning for so many years. Alive!" That night, she decided to lay all the cards on the table before her husband. Garrett came home late, as usual. Rosalie was already asleep. Tammy sat in the living room on the sofa, the DNA test results in her hands. "Studying something there?" Instead of greeting, Garrett asked rudely. During these days, their relationship had completely deteriorated. "I found my son," Tammy answered calmly. "He is alive and well." "What kind of nonsense are you talking again?" exclaimed Garrett. "Oh, you really need to go to the hospital." "And you're going to jail." Without raising her voice, Tammy said, "Maybe you can now tell me how you got rid of our son? You looked me in the eye for so many years and lied. You yourself gave our child to the orphanage when I was between life and death." Garrett suddenly became gaunt, then took the documents from the clinic and read them. "Well, why are you silent?" Tammy tugged his sleeve. "Look me in the eyes now and tell me that our Bobby is dead." "How did you find him?" Garrett said in an unexpectedly hoarse tone. "After all, Marla and I spent almost 6 months looking for him." "Oh, so it was you and Marla. Tell me," demanded Tammy. "What is there to tell?" Garrett shrugged. "When the doctors said that our son would be mentally retarded, I immediately decided that we didn't need all that, to torture ourselves to make him suffer. Marla worked at the maternity hospital, in the children's ward as a nurse. Yes, she really is my classmate. I talked to her. I told her that you didn't want to give up the baby, and then she suggested this option. Pay the head doctor for a death certificate. That's how it worked out. While you were unconscious, they gave me the certificate, and I buried an empty coffin. And then the boy was taken to an orphanage. So while I was mourning him in the hospital, he was there waiting for me." Tammy could barely hold back her tears. "And you lied to me." "Tammy, I meant well. Why would we need a disabled child?" "You decided for me. You robbed me of my son. What does it matter what he is? I would have loved him anyway. The most important thing is that he's a normal, good, bright kid. Doesn't it hurt your heart to know that your son is growing up with strangers?" "I've been following his fate all this time. Yes, a year later I found out he was adopted and seemed normal. Yes, I berated myself for this act, but what could I have done? So I decided to forget about it. Through Marla, I only found out how he was doing. And then the boy's foster mum died, and he and his foster dad disappeared. Marla and I looked for them, but we couldn't find them." "With Marla?" Tammy grinned. "She's been driving a wedge between us too. Admit it, she was even in our house when your secretary allegedly spilled coffee on your shirt." "I saw this. Her near our entrance, and then you in the house." Garrett shook his head. He couldn't admit it, but it was true. Marla had been in their apartment. They met to discuss where to look for the boy and his foster father. Garrett had run home for a minute to get some paperwork. Marla waited for him in the car, then suddenly came up to get him. He opened the door and she hugged him, pressed herself against him, began to undress herself. It was an obsession, a mistake. Everything happened quickly. Garrett afterward began to say that his wife would come at any minute. Marla smiled understandingly and left. Then Tammy came in. Yes, he had cheated on her, but only once. But he couldn't admit it. "Tammy, we were just looking for this child," he stubbornly repeated. "A boy. A child. You talk about him as if he were a stranger. Garrett, this is your own son. His name is Eric now." "I only have a daughter." Garrett raised his voice. "And enough about it. Let him grow up in another family. Everything is normal with him, as I understand it. That's good." "I won't leave it like that. I'll make sure my son grows up with me," Tammy exclaimed. "Forget it." Garrett shook his head. "And I won't allow it. And if you raise a fuss, I'll divorce you. Yes, I'll divorce you, and I'll take Rosalie. The court will give me custody." "What do you think you are? You're worthless, unemployed, living off me. You're nothing without me." "That's how you talk," Tammy chuckled. "Aren't you the one who made me like this? But you're wrong if you think I'm so spineless. I'll leave you anyway and take my daughter away from you." That night, Tammy slept in her daughter's room, although it's difficult to call it sleep. The woman lay all night with her eyes closed, thinking. What should she do now? She won't be able to live on as before. Garrett disgusts her, and Eric must be taken away, and she won't give up Rosalie. In the morning, Tammy opened her eyes as soon as the front door slammed behind her husband. Kissing her sleepy daughter, she carefully got out of bed and went to the window. A new day was beginning, and Tammy was starting a new life. She was getting used to the idea of having her son around. There was only a little bit left, and they would be together. According to Eric's stories, it turned out that his adoptive family loved him, even though they lived simply. The father drank for a while, which was understandable, as he had survived the death of his wife, but now it seemed to be all right with him. By lunchtime, when Rosalie was already watching a children's TV program in her room, Tammy made up her mind. "Daughter, I'll go away for half an hour. Will you be okay alone at home?" She looked at Rosalie, who nodded in response. Tammy had calculated everything. Garrett wouldn't be home for 7 hours, and Marcus, Eric's foster father, would come home at lunchtime. They needed to meet and talk. Grabbing the DNA test documents, Tammy headed towards the old 5-story building. Eric, a chatty boy, had long ago told her which entrance he lived in and which apartment. An elderly woman in a wheelchair opened the door. "Who are you?" She was surprised, blindly looking at the guest. "I don't know you." "My name is Tammy," the woman said worriedly. "Your grandson and I sometimes walk together in the park." "Ah, Tammy," the woman smiled. "Eric was talking about you. The picture you took was a good one. Come in. Eric ran to the neighbours. We're out of salt. Marcus came for lunch, and I hadn't finished salting the soup. And as luck would have it, the salt shaker is empty." "Oh, Marcus is at home. Then please call him. We need to talk." The old lady shrugged her shoulders and shouted, "Son, come here." A tall man came out of the kitchen. He looked less gloomy now than he had at their previous meeting. "You wanted to talk about Eric?" he asked. "Forgive me for the harshness last time. I wasn't in a good mood. Of course you can communicate with him. I realized that you're a good person." "Thank you," Tammy whispered. "But I have something else to discuss with you. Could we talk privately outdoors? And by the way, pardon me for interrupting your lunch, but it's critical." "Yes, I've already realized that," Marcus grinned. On the landing, they met Eric. "Oh, Tammy," the boy said, surprised. "Hello, Eric." The woman almost burst out with "son," but she could hardly restrain herself. "I've come to talk to your daddy." "About what?" the child asked in a businesslike manner. "Eric, what's with the interrogations?" Marcus grinned. "March to the apartment. Your grandmother is waiting for salt." Outside the entrance, the adults sat on a bench. Tammy got her courage and pulled out papers. "Here's this." "What's this?" "It may seem absurd, but I'm Eric's birth mother." Marcus looked at Tammy confused, then at the papers. Tammy, worried, immediately began her explanation. She told everything as it happened. Marcus listened, his head lowered. "I won't ask how you found us," he finally said. "But if you try to take Eric away from me, I won't keep quiet. I'll go to court." "Marcus, please understand, I'm in shock myself," Tammy tried to explain. "I don't want any litigation, especially since my husband isn't behaving appropriately in this situation. I just want to communicate with Eric." "And what will you tell him? That you gave birth to him and abandoned him?" "Understand, he considers another woman his mother. Can you imagine what that would do to the child?" "I understand everything, and I don't know how to improve it. That's why I came to you just to talk. Together we'll find a solution, I believe it." "Together? Are you kidding me? You abandoned a sick child like an unnecessary kitten, and now you come to your senses?" "I didn't abandon him. That doesn't change anything. What do you want? You want me to give you Eric? What do you want him for? You have a daughter, so raise her. Especially since, as you say, your husband isn't happy about finding your son." "I'll leave my husband. I'm not going to live with him after what happened anyway." "I don't need that information, and don't come to us any more. I forbid you to see Eric." Marcus resolutely stood up and headed for the entrance without looking back. Tammy remained seated on the bench, seemingly petrified. Yes, Marcus can be understood, but who will understand her? 5 years ago she was lied to and deprived of a child, and now, when she's suddenly found him, it turns out that she has no rights. And indeed, Eric considers that deceased woman to be his mother. Tammy cried. That's how she suddenly found her son, and at the same time couldn't get him back. Tammy slowly approached the house. At the entrance, she saw her husband's car. The next moment, her husband and Rosalie came out of the house. "Mummy!" The daughter rejoiced and rushed to Tammy, but Garrett intercepted her. "Go to the car," he commanded the girl. "And Mummy?" "I said get in the car," Garrett shouted and pushed Rosalie into the cabin, then turned to Tammy. "What did you think? You can behave as you please? Who do you think you are? You should have done what I told you to do. I told you to forget about that kid. What did you do? You ran straight to his foster dad. Were you crying about there, telling him what a bad husband I was?" "How do you know?" "I followed you. I saw you sitting on the bench. How he sent you away. Anyway, it's like this. Rosalie and I are leaving now, and I won't tell you where, but I don't want to see you in the apartment in 2 days. I'm divorcing you. If you obstruct me, I will not allow you to see your daughter. Do you understand?" "No, no, you wouldn't dare do that to me," screamed Tammy, crying. "What's my fault? You behaved like the last scoundrel. You say you followed me? Didn't you want to look at your son?" "He is not my son," Garrett cut her off. At this time, Rosalie was crying in the car. Garrett got into the car and drove away. Tammy rushed after her daughter but stopped, feeling empty. Then she fell on the pavement, sobbing uncontrollably. Her life had shattered into small pieces. How could she put everything back together now? Marcus was walking to work, agitated after his conversation with Tammy. What kind of a mother is she? Poor? Unfortunate? No way. She is a cruel liar. Marcus remembered how he and Gloria first brought Eric from the orphanage. He was just a baby then, but he grew stronger and developed. The doctors turned out to be entirely wrong. The child was perfectly healthy and hit all his milestones on time. He talked, even babbled. Soon it was unstoppable. Everything in their family was fine until Gloria fell ill. At first they thought it was nothing serious, but by the time the doctors figured it out, it was too late to do anything. Gloria died. Marcus had loved her so much. They had been together since high school. Gloria had waited for him while he was in the army. They had dreamed of a large, loving family, but the big family didn't work out. When Marcus was left alone with a child in his arms, he felt so lost that he started drinking and quit his job. He had been a good programmer. His mother-in-law, assessing the situation, immediately insisted he move in with her. Marcus listened and gradually came to his senses, returning to work. Yes, he realized that Eric spent a lot of time alone and needed to go to kindergarten, and that his mother was very sick, but they would manage. And then suddenly, this biological mum showed up. All she said was a lie, of course. She did not give up her son. Such thoughts were in Marcus's head as he approached Tammy's house. He witnessed the whole ugly scene. Garrett pushing his daughter into the car, shouting at Tammy, and what exactly he shouted. Marcus couldn't believe a father could talk about his own child like that. For a moment he wanted to intervene and hit this creep, but Garrett drove away. Marcus walked up to Tammy and held out his hand. "Tammy, please calm down. Don't cry." "You?" Tammy asked, surprised as she wiped her tears. "What are you doing here?" "I was walking to my work. I saw everything. And now I believe you. He'd do a mean thing without blinking an eye." "He'll take Rosalie away from me," Tammy sobbed. "I don't know what to do." "First, you need to calm down. Go home. Here's my phone number. Give me yours, and I'll call you this evening." Marcus held out a torn notebook page and wrote down the number Tammy dictated. "Please don't cry. Believe me, as long as we're alive, everything can be fixed." He walked her to the entrance and hurried to work. The rest of the day, Tammy lay on the couch and curled up in a ball, unable to sleep or get up. Her strength had left her. She dialed her daughter's number several times, but the phone was out of range. And then she got a call. "Daughter?" Tammy shouted into the receiver without looking. "Excuse me, it's Marcus." She heard a confused male voice. "Ah, it's you, I'm sorry," Tammy sighed.
I thought Rosalie was calling. I'm standing at your entrance. Can we talk? Yes, come in. Tammy gave him the apartment number. Soon the guest was at her doorstep, looking a bit shaken, and put the kettle on in the kitchen. You have a nice place, Marcus noted, looking around the apartment. It's not my apartment, Tammy replied sadly. It's Garrett's property and he's kicking me out. Just like that. I thought I was going to leave my husband, but he threw me out and took my daughter away. Do you have somewhere else to go? To be honest, I don't. You know, I'm so sick of it all. I don't want to live. But you have to live. You know, Tammy, I thought about what you told me and what I saw today, and I realized one thing. You don't resist fate. Let everything go as it goes. You'll see. Everything will work out. So Garrett is going to give me his daughter? Never. But you still have a son. And you won't give him to me. Moreover, I'm homeless now. Do you have anyone you can turn to for help? Tammy didn't answer, only grinned sadly. Yes, over the years, Garrett had done everything to ensure she was alone and completely dependent on him. Marcus realized this without words. He thought for a while, then shook his head decisively. Pack up. Where to? Tammy was confused. You'll stay with us. Mum won't mind and Eric will be happy. You know, he's so attached to you. He always comes from a walk and tells us how he walked with you, how he played with your daughter. He's drawn to you. And I can't live without him any more, Tammy said quietly. Nor without Rosalie. Marcus said nothing. Yes, now he saw before him an unhappy young woman who had faced enormous lies and betrayal in her life. How to help her? Marcus had only a vague idea, but on a purely human level he couldn't help but respond to her pain. Tammy agreed to Marcus's proposal, and in a couple of hours she was leaving the apartment where she had created a cosy family nest for so many years. She turned around to say goodbye. She left everything behind, taking only necessities, a camera, a picture of her daughter, and of course her documents. Helen, Marcus's mother, seeing the now familiar guest, was very surprised. While she and her son whispered in the kitchen, Tammy and Eric sat in the living room. The boy showed her his toys and books. Eric was so happy. Where's Rosalie? The boy remembered. Will she also live with us? No, Tammy sighed. She's still with her daddy, but I hope we can see her soon. Meanwhile, let's look at this book together. She took out the alphabet book, and she and Eric began to study the letters. The boy already knew more than half of them. What a good boy you are, Tammy admired. A little more, and we'll be reading together. Yes, Eric has a good memory. Tammy heard Helen's voice behind her. The woman stood in the doorway watching attentively as the guest studied with her grandson. Marcus had told her everything. Now, looking at Tammy and Eric, she noticed how much they resembled each other. In the depths of Helen's soul, a hope stirred. Perhaps her son could get along with this Tammy. He wasn't much older than her. They'd make a good couple, and Eric would have a complete family. 2 days passed. Tammy was adjusting to her new surroundings. She swiftly cleared the apartment until it sparkled and cooked various delicious meals. The elderly woman appreciated her guest's efforts and began hinting to her son to take a closer look. But Marcus pretended not to understand his mother's intentions. Eric followed Tammy around, helping with cleaning and cooking. He forgot about his street life, only asking about Rosalie. Such questions pained Tammy's heart. She knew nothing. Rosalie's phone remained silent. Garrett had blocked her calls. Suddenly, Tammy saw her husband's car pull up to his house, and he stepped out with Marla. This infuriated Tammy. He had assured her that there was nothing between him and Marla, yet here they were, entering the apartment together. Tammy went to them. "What are you doing here?" Garrett asked rudely when he saw Tammy. "Where's my daughter?" She blocked their path. "None of your business," he retorted. "I've already filed the documents with the court. You'll get a summons. The judge will determine when you can see your daughter. Don't be surprised. I know where you live. Good people informed me. Just as a thought,
You're a fallen woman, running to that man who's raising the kid. How are you doing with him?" "Am I a fallen woman?" Tammy sneered. "I didn't bring a lover to our apartment, unlike you. Look better at your mistress, who doesn't hesitate to have an affair with married men." "Garrett," exclaimed Marla sweetly, "what is she saying?" In truth, she was only feigning indignation. She was actually delighted. At last Garrett was hers. Yes, she had achieved her goal after so many years. They were together. Back in the hospital, she had first whispered to Garrett that his son was born abnormal, telling all sorts of horror stories. While the doctors were cautious about the prognosis, Marla described to Garrett all the horrors of life with such a diagnosis for the newborn. So Garrett believed her and agreed to give up the child. Marla then personally brought him all the papers from the doctor and quietly settled the whole story. She hoped that after all this, Garrett would leave his wife and come to her. She would then give him a healthy child. But no, Garrett stayed with his family, which angered Marla tremendously. She decided to remain close to Garrett, learning about the boy and passing on news about him, while emphasizing that even if the boy seemed healthy now, it didn't mean anything. The disease could manifest at any moment. All the while she was working on Garrett like a cunning fox. He was like a rock at first, but water wears away stone. Finally Marla got her way, and everything worked out perfectly. Now, Garrett would definitely leave Tammy. Of course, Marla was a bit upset that Garrett had taken away his daughter, but she reasoned that if the court granted custody to the father, she would convince Garrett to send the girl to the best boarding school. Let her live at a distance.
"Garrett, she's insulting me,"
Marla added in a trembling voice. Garrett, his face purple with rage, glared at Tammy. "Don't you dare say anything bad about Marla, and forget your way here. We'll be divorced soon and you can live with your puppy." "That puppy is your son too," Tammy said bitterly. "Though how many times must I say it? Garrett, I want you to hear it. I won't report to the police. I'll keep quiet about what happened in our family, but you should bring Rosalie back to me." "Should I?" Garrett sneered. "Our daughter will live with me, and I don't care what you report to the police. I have such connections that you'll be silenced." That was the end of their conversation. Garrett and Marla entered the building, and Tammy watched them go. No, she wasn't crying or even angry. In her soul, a grand plan to destroy her husband had finally matured. She didn't want that. She'd suggested they work things out calmly, but he wouldn't. That evening, Tammy asked Marcus how skilled a programmer he was. "Well, people don't seem to complain," Marcus shrugged. "Why do you ask?" "I want to access Garrett's accounting department at work. I think there might be some shady business going on there." "What do you mean?" "I suspect there's some double bookkeeping happening." "Decided to take down your husband?" Marcus smiled. "I didn't start this," Tammy replied thoughtfully. "He's been yelling that I won't get any truth from the prosecutor's office or the police about the children. So, I'll take another route. I need to access their accounting reports and send them to the tax office. Let them investigate. Meanwhile, I'll contact the magazine where I used to work. Who knows, maybe they would like to get me back." "Well, I won't try to change your mind. You're doing the right thing." That evening, Marcus managed to access the computers of both Garrett's firm's chief accountant and Garrett himself. Indeed, Tammy's suspicions were correct. A considerable amount of money was being funneled into fake accounts, and double bookkeeping was taking place. Tammy copied all the data and sent it to the tax office. Then she met with the editorial staff of the magazine. "Tammy, it's a shame you left our publication. You're an excellent photographer," said the editor-in-chief. "I wouldn't mind coming back," Tammy replied. "But as I recall, your husband didn't want you to work." "That doesn't matter anymore. We're getting a divorce." The editor-in-chief was very surprised and offered Tammy a job with probation. A few weeks had passed. "I know he's having a lot of trouble at work right now," Tammy told Marcus one evening. "It's not surprising. He always thinks only about himself. Apparently, the thirst for profit has turned his head. You did it cleverly, Marcus said. Now, they'll give Rosalie to you for sure. By the way, do you know where she's been all this time? Yes, she called me. Garrett put her in a private boarding house to keep her out of the way. That's how much he loves his daughter. Rosalie cried, asked me to take her, and I promised we'd meet soon. Tammy paused for a moment, thinking, I should probably start looking for an apartment. Do you know if anyone's renting in your building? Why do you need that? Marcus was surprised. Well, how else? If they give me Rosalie, and I'm sure they will, we'll need somewhere to live. We can't make you feel cramped. Although, to be honest, it's already hard for me without Eric. We'll find something for sure. I'm worried about other things, said Marcus. You have a place to live, but what about a job? Garrett still has more financial opportunities. You think I visited the magazine editorial board for nothing? Tammy laughed. They hired me and offered a very decent salary, so I'm prepared for the trial. The divorce proceedings followed, and the court took everything into account. The recent events at Garrett's firm, his relationship with another woman, and more. In the end, Tammy and Garrett divorced, with their daughter staying with her mother. The court also considered the provision of property, and Garrett had to pay Tammy almost half of everything. But this is her revenge, Marla shouted across the courtroom upon hearing the decision, for the fact that her son was given to the orphanage. What son? What orphanage? The judge asked, surprised. Marla, realizing she had said too much, tried to backtrack, but eventually burst into tears and told everything. Tammy, why didn't you say a word about this story? The judge asked sternly, after listening to Marla. After all, you're the injured party. I didn't want to stir things up. Why should I? My son is with me now, and you've returned my daughter. I don't want to take revenge on anyone. Life will sort itself out. But now, the prosecutor's office will handle this, replied the judge. Marla shrieked when she heard this, and Garrett turned pale. What a fool, he whispered to Marla as she dissolved into bitter tears. Some time passed after these events, and soon Tammy and Garrett met in court again. Marla and other maternity hospital employees, including the head doctor, were there. All of them were visibly disturbed, and for good reason. As a result, the head doctor lost his position and received a sentence for several years. Marla received a suspended sentence. Garrett, however, avoided criminal responsibility this time, getting off with compensation for moral damages to Tammy. The amount was substantial, equivalent to the cost of their former apartment. The ex-husband didn't argue and simply handed over the housing documents. After the trial, Garrett had nothing left but to pack his remaining belongings into his car and leave the city. No one knows where he went. Marla, by the way, refused to leave and now sells cosmetics at the mall. After a few months, Tammy returned with her children to her family home. Now there was nothing to remind them of the old environment. Marcus had done a good job renovating. Now Marcus and Tammy are together. Somehow it all worked out so well. They seemed to be just friends, and then one day love blossomed. Such love that Tammy realized these were real feelings. They haven't told Eric the whole truth yet, and probably never will. Why should he know that he was once betrayed by the closest person? There's one more person in this story who is satisfied with the result. Mrs. Mahon. The head doctor has been punished after all. She and Tammy are still in touch. Now, Tammy, her children, and her husband visit her regularly. They even helped renovate her house. With the money she received from Garrett, Tammy was able to open a small photo studio. Now she's even a famous in-demand photographer at various celebrations, birthdays, anniversaries, and weddings. She especially likes shooting weddings. Every now and then, she whispers to herself, "This is true happiness."